With the opening and full-scale operation of the dungeon, a true financial windfall began pouring into Tempest's coffers. The Monster Nation, still in the midst of expansion and consolidation, has seen its revenue skyrocket since the founding festival, attracting more and more visitors from all across the world each day. Its devoted subjects would serve Rimuru without ever asking for the slightest payment, their loyalty being absolute. And yet, with his deeply rooted Japanese sensibilities, Rimuru could never tolerate such an injustice. He therefore made sure to properly compensate Veldora and Ramirez, the two pillars overseeing the dungeon's administration, and the sums granted were substantial enough to impress even outside observers. In reality, those amounts far exceeded what appearances might suggest. In this video, we're going to break down the inner workings of the Demon Nation's economy and reveal the actual salaries earned by Rimuru and Tempest's top executives. Since Tempest's founding festival, the Monster Nation has become a crossroads where all races and cultures converge. The official opening of the dungeon has dramatically increased the flow of human adventurers, who now arrive in a constant stream, not to mention unusual products such as merchandise featuring Masayuki, whose popularity continues to rise. But beyond these commercial curiosities, it is the entirety of Tempest's civilization that commands respect. Across the entire Central World, the level of development achieved by the Monster Nation is unmatched. The services available in exchange for money are both incredibly diverse and of exceptional quality. An adventurer descending into the depths of the dungeon can enjoy delicious meals along the way and stay in impeccably maintained lodging facilities, a level of luxury almost unheard of in any other dungeon in the world. Once back on the surface, they are greeted by shops offering astonishingly designed clothing and armor, highly effective healing potions, and even refined establishments catering to a wide range of desires. In other words, Tempest is truly a nation where money turns into limitless pleasure. Those who, like Veldora, have the rare privilege of being close enough to Rimuru to directly ask for whatever they desire may indeed receive special treatment. However, those requests must still fall within what Rimuru is willing to grant, and constantly gauging his mood is no easy task, even for a supreme class dragon. That being said, now that the dungeon's operation is generating stable and significant profits, an official salary has been granted to Ramirez and Veldora in direct recognition of their responsibilities in managing it. This reveals something deeply significant. Even beings as powerful as a true dragon or a demon lord fully integrate into the Monster Nation's economic system and choose to benefit from it. The peace reigning over Tempest is almost unsettling in how complete it is. These two individuals, fully aware that a poorly chosen response could earn them a reprimand from Rimuru, ultimately behave with a surprisingly convenient level of compliance, making them remarkably easy to manage. Before going any further, let's recall some fundamental aspects of the Central World's economy. This world, where Rimuru and his allies live, is home to numerous nations, including the newly established Tempest Empire, which is on the verge of becoming the central hub of all civilization. Many of these nations already possess fully established sovereign states. Just on the western side alone, there are nations such as the Armed Nation of Dwarves, the Kingdom of Blumund, the Kingdom of Farmus, the Kingdom of Ingracia, the Magic Dynasty of Sarion, and the Holy Empire of Ruberios, just to name a few. Each of these nations has its own culture, its own customs, and its own level of civilization. Among them, nations populated by humans, high elves, and dwarves have long abandoned primitive bartering in favor of a structured monetary system based on the exchange of metal coins with recognized and accepted value. Magical creatures, who usually rely on bartering in their daily lives, sometimes find themselves forced to use currency as well, depending on the place and circumstances. It's also worth remembering that it was in his slime form that Rimuru first traveled to the Dwarf Kingdom, directly confronting this economic reality. Some older nations also possess currencies with unique properties, as seen during Clayman's Revenge arc. However, throughout the entire Central World, there is only one currency that stands above all others in terms of reliability, respect, and widespread use: the Dwarven coins. Minted by the Armed Nation of Dwarves, Dworgen, this currency serves as the economic standard of the entire Central World. Its reliability is based on an unbreakable feature. Each coin is individually engraved with a unique inscription magic and managed through its own serial number. As a result, counterfeiting is structurally impossible. It is worth noting that even Raphael's analytical capabilities, as formidable as they are, would be unable to perfectly replicate these coins due to the rigor of their control system. Any attempt at forgery is instantly detected without the slightest ambiguity. That is why it is considered extremely reliable, and there are primarily 4 types of coins. These 4 denominations follow a fixed value ratio. Each higher tier is worth exactly 100 times the lower one. Now let's take a closer look at the practical uses of each type of coin. Let's start with the copper coin. With a value equivalent to about 10 Japanese yen, it represents the lowest denomination in the system. It rarely appears at the forefront of the story, but it can easily be imagined circulating in everyday life, for buying a snack from a street stall, purchasing small daily items, or covering those minor expenses people no longer even think about. Next comes the silver coin, the most common and widely used currency throughout the Central world. In the capital of the Kingdom of Ingracia, the average daily wage of a worker is 7 silver coins, which amounts to around 210 coins per month, the equivalent of 210,000 yen. This figure may seem modest by modern Japanese standards, but as one moves away from major cities, the economic reality becomes significantly harsher. In rural areas, wages drop drastically. Some workers do not even accumulate 100 silver coins after an entire year of hard labor, which corresponds to less than 100,000 yen annually. A staggering inequality that highlights the massive gap between urban centers and the deep countryside. For people living in these remote regions, the silver coin literally represents the highest monetary value they have ever held, and many have never even seen a gold coin in their entire lives. For comparison, Rimuru used to earn 10 silver coins per day for his role as a teacher, along with 3 daily meals, a particularly favorable condition for that time. As for adventurers, the silver coin is also a familiar currency, but expenses quickly start to rise. The most basic healing potion, the simple low-grade potion, already costs 3 silver coins per unit, which is roughly equivalent to 3,000 yen, based on the official pricing in Dwargen, the central hub of global trade. 3,000 yen for a single dose of healing is a serious drain on any adventurer's finances, but when your life is on the line, the decision is quickly made. It's worth noting that by the time of the anime's 4th season, low-grade potions produced in Tempest are sold for 4 silver coins, while high-grade potions reach as much as 35 silver coins. This price difference is easily explained. The quality of remedies produced in the Monster Nation far surpasses that of standard products circulating elsewhere. Additionally, even a single night in a modest countryside inn costs 2 silver coins, further confirming the overall trend of high living costs across the entire Central world. Now let's move on to the gold coin. At a rate of 100,000 yen per coin, we are entering an entirely different scale. Such a high value is simply due to the fact that gold itself holds exceptional intrinsic worth in the Central world. A gold coin is mainly used in 2 ways. On one hand, for transactions at the level of state budgets, and on the other, for the purchase of luxury goods. Needless to say, no ordinary citizen would use a gold coin for daily purchases. The denomination is far too large. In Tempest, luxury clothing designed by Shuna is traded in gold coins. In the spin-off titled The Ways of the Monster Nation, a new outfit presented to Framea is priced at 6 gold coins per piece, a cost comparable to high-end fashion houses even by modern-day standards. As for the full potion, it is not yet publicly available, but its projected price exceeds 5 gold coins, which amounts to over 500,000 yen. This pricing is deliberate, almost aggressive, but entirely justified. A potion capable of fully regenerating a severed limb cannot be sold cheaply without risking serious disruption to the balance of the world. Finally, we come to the last denomination, and by far the rarest, the stellar gold coins. A single coin is worth 10 million yen, an absolutely colossal value. This extraordinary rarity stems from its method of production. Forged through a unique dwarven craftsmanship technique, each coin is infused with condensed magicules during its creation. The result is a process so delicate and demanding that only 1 single coin can be produced per month. King Gazel himself confirmed that these coins did not even exist at the time of Dwargen's founding. Because of this, the stellar gold coins transcend the simple concept of currency. They hold true artistic and heritage value beyond their function as a means of exchange. They are almost never seen circulating in ordinary markets. Instead, they are reserved for transactions between sovereign nations. war reparations, large-scale geopolitical treaties, and similar high-level dealings conducted behind closed doors. In the story, we remember that Diablo imposed an astronomical war indemnity on the Kingdom of Farmus, 10,000 stellar gold coins, equivalent to 100 billion yen, a deliberately overwhelming demand. On top of that, stellar gold coins are naturally subject to hoarding. Outside of exceptional transactions, they simply have no practical use. Converting them into gold coins is already a major logistical operation, and they cannot be freely stored or transported like ordinary currency. They function more like a non-transferable financial asset requiring authorization. As a matter of fact, when the Kingdom of Farmus made its initial payment of 1,500 stellar gold coins, equivalent to 15 billion yen, those coins came from the secret reserves personally accumulated by the former king, Edmaris. The total number of stellar gold coins in circulation across the entire world is estimated to be fewer than 10,000. This means that those 1,500 coins handed over to Tempest alone represented more than 1/10 of all stellar gold coins existing on the entire planet, a transfer of wealth of truly historic proportions. What is truly staggering is that Tempest set the reward for conquering the final floor of the dungeon at 100 stellar gold coins. 100 stellar gold coins, that is 1 billion yen in a single payout. The difficulty is objectively insurmountable. Veldora himself stands as the absolute guardian on the 100th and final floor, so no one has ever claimed this reward. But the mere fact that Tempest can offer such a sum without hesitation speaks volumes about the colossal financial power the monster nation has achieved. Earlier, we discussed the income of ordinary citizens, but it goes without saying that salaries vary significantly depending on professions and nations. In the Central World, the payment system is primarily based on daily wages, while adventurers operate on a performance-based system, earning rewards proportional to their achievements. Those holding positions comparable to civil servants in our world generally earn a few silver coins per day, a salary that also varies depending on region and rank. In the capital of the Kingdom of Ingrassia, a teacher at the Royal Academy can earn up to 10 silver coins per day, along with housing, 3 daily meals, and even privileged access to the capital's library, a dream package for that era. As a reminder, Rimuru himself, in his role as a teacher, earned 10 silver coins per day with 3 meals included, a highly favorable situation in every respect. This same generosity can be seen in other moments of his professional life. During student field trips, the homeroom teacher whose class achieved the best results would receive an exceptional bonus of 10 gold coins, the equivalent of 1 million yen. While these types of positions offer particularly attractive conditions, other urban jobs provide an average annual income of slightly under 2 million yen, which remains respectable in this world. At the bottom of the scale, low-ranking workers earn only a few silver coins per day, while residents in rural areas cap out at an annual income below 1 million yen, a harsh reality. That being said, in a world where entertainment is scarce and life is simple, a few silver coins are generally enough to cover basic daily needs. And if, by chance, someone manages to obtain even a single gold coin, they can afford to live for several months without working, a true treasure for the average person. Now let's turn to the Holy Empire of Ruberios and its Holy Knights. According to Glenda, the compensation system there is fundamentally different. Instead of receiving direct monetary salaries, members are provided with resources in kind, and each individual is responsible for obtaining the money they need according to their own circumstances. This system stems directly from the egalitarian philosophy that defines Ruberios as a nation. This principle applies equally to Hinata, leader of the Crusaders, and to the members of the Rook Geniuses, the 2 elite corps she effectively commands. That being said, during the founding festival, we saw that this knight does not hesitate to purchase high-end luxury outfits, which suggests that she has access to additional sources of income, one way or another. In contrast to this model, the Eastern Empire stands out with salary conditions that are significantly more generous than the rest of the world. For the military, an annual compensation system is in place, with several notable advantages. The yearly salary is paid in full in advance. In the event of a promotion during the year, the difference is adjusted and paid the following year. And for those who enlist without any money, an advance, referred to as preparatory funds, is immediately granted from day one. The army also covers housing, food, and clothing, making military service a particularly valuable lifeline for those coming from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. Here is the breakdown of annual salaries within the Imperial Army. The basic infantry soldier receives only their base salary, amounting to 10 gold coins, approximately 1 million yen. A second lieutenant earns, combining base salary and rank allowance, 36 gold coins, which equals roughly 3,600,000 yen. A commander, on the other hand, receives a total of 40 gold coins, around 4,400,000 yen. Other worlders benefit from especially favorable treatment. Shinji, the other worlder seen in the story, earned close to 70 gold coins per year, approximately 7 million yen. Mark and Shin, for their part, each received 50 gold coins annually, around 5 million yen, well above ordinary soldiers. On top of that, additional bonuses are granted for dangerous missions, giving the impression, at first glance, that joining the Imperial Army guarantees a comfortable life. However, the reality is more nuanced. The cost of living within the Empire is generally high, and Shinji himself complained that a luxurious lifestyle remained out of reach despite his salary. Moreover, leaving the army to establish oneself independently is subject to particularly strict conditions, making financial stability difficult to achieve outside military service. Although the Empire possesses numerous leisure infrastructures, they are primarily designed for the nobility. The prices there are prohibitive for ordinary soldiers. It is precisely this reality that led Shinji and his companions, after discovering that adventurers in Tempest Dungeon could earn more while staying alive, to become increasingly drawn to life in the Monster Nation until they no longer wanted to leave. On the monsters' side, the situation is radically different. Their society is built on the law of the strongest, and even within territories under the authority of a demon lord, the concept of salary simply does not exist. Money itself is almost a foreign concept. Fruits, game, and precious metals are exchanged directly through an age-old bartering system. In its early days, Tempest itself operated under this model. During the first years following its foundation, the Monster Nation did not yet have a true monetary economy. It functioned through a full distribution system. All residents' needs were covered, guaranteed housing, necessary goods provided as needed, and collective services fully insured. This system, managed with the absolute precision of Raphael, was perfectly viable because Tempest produced nearly everything it needed, an autarkic and sovereign economy supported by flawless organization. This is precisely why the concept of salary was, until then, unnecessary within Tempest itself. However, for transactions with external visitors, adventurers, merchants, and traders of all kinds, the world's common currency is used without hesitation. Tempest's products are numerous and unmatched in quality. Highly effective healing potions, refined dishes developed from recipes created within the nation, exceptional clothing, Tempest's black rice, as well as weapons and armor forged by Kurobi and Kaijin, goods that simply cannot be found anywhere else no matter how much one is willing to pay. As a result, visitors never leave empty-handed. Despite this economic prosperity, which created no urgent need to establish an internal salary system, Rimuru could not accept the situation without discomfort. With his modern Japanese mindset, allowing his subordinates to work without any form of compensation felt deeply unjust. In Tempest, every adult has a defined role, without exception, and among them are extraordinary individuals such as the Demon Lord Dino, Ramirez, and even Veldora himself. From the perspective of a person from the 21st century, making such exceptional beings work without pay would be worse than any exploitative company imaginable. However, monsters have been shaped for millennia by an entirely different logic, the logic of strength and bartering. Taking what you want by force and directly exchanging surplus, that is the only reality they have ever known. Expecting them to grasp the subtleties of a monetary economy overnight was an immense challenge. The spin-off The Ways of the Monster Nation illustrates this perfectly. Rimuru, acting like a benevolent mentor, patiently teaches children and newcomers how trade works and the fundamentals of customer service. Practical, real-world tests were even organized, where they had to sell healing potions to actual customers, with rather chaotic results, as some trainees nearly got scammed by unscrupulous merchants. The path toward mastering commerce was clearly going to be a long one. And this reality does not concern monsters alone. The primordial demons themselves, beings born at the dawn of time and destined for eternity, share this same worldview, completely detached from the concept of monetary compensation. The three demonesses, Testarossa, Ultima, and Carrera, future subordinates of Rimuru, expressed this very clearly. Testarossa stated that it would be presumptuous to receive any kind of reward from Rimuru-sama, and that in her view, if one desires something, one simply takes it by force. Ultima, for her part, declared that being able to repay Rimuru-sama was more than enough for her. That says everything. And in the spin-off, The Ways of the Monster Nation, we see them put this philosophy into practice without the slightest hesitation, paying out of their own pocket to treat Framea to meals, or forcefully taking over a luxury hot spring establishment to turn it into a private reservation. The very concept of economic transactions is completely foreign to them, and they see nothing wrong with that. Faced with this reality, Tempest chose not to rush things. Rather than immediately imposing a monetary system that no one truly understands yet, priority was given to expanding an internal merit point system. At the same time, a general education program was implemented so that monsters could gradually learn reading, writing, and arithmetic, the essential foundations needed to eventually understand a monetary economy. But in this process, a certain demon would step in the most unexpected way, because the expansion of the merit point system was actually a proposal from Diablo himself. While Myourmile and Rimuru were struggling to design a viable salary structure, it was Diablo who presented them with this idea. The concept is disarmingly simple. One stamp for each completed task, proportional to the effort provided. No need to master monetary values, no need for complex calculations. Even the most arithmetic-resistant monster can intuitively understand this system. At first, these points were simply used to reserve special meals at the cafeteria. But since some monsters didn't care about food at all, it quickly became necessary to come up with new rewards that could be obtained through these points. After discussions between the two management veterans, the following rewards were introduced. Priority purchase rights for weapons forged by Kurobe, priority access to Shuna's latest clothing creations, and a replica of Rimuru's personal fishing rod. Highly coveted items within Tempest, things everyone desperately wanted to get their hands on first. But Diablo proposed something entirely different. His idea was a reward of a completely different nature, the right to serve Lord Rimuru for an entire day. His reasoning was flawlessly presented. Just as Lord Rimuru expresses gratitude toward his subordinates, it would be natural for them to have the opportunity to personally express their gratitude in return. Therefore, it should be an extremely rare privilege, limited to a single recipient per month, and assigned a very high point value. From the outside, it was barely disguised personal desire. But the proposal was delivered with such rhetorical skill that neither Myourmile nor Rimuru, and even more surprisingly, not even Rimuru himself, noticed the scheme. Everyone approved it. What followed was entirely predictable. Diablo began secretly buying up other monsters' points behind the scenes, effectively monopolizing this exclusive service right. When Rimuru realized that Diablo had just benefited from it twice in a row, he immediately understood he had been played, and the reward was promptly abolished, leaving behind a memory as brief as it was unforgettable. Diablo, however, had already fully enjoyed the privilege before its removal, and had clearly anticipated its disappearance from the very beginning, the forced rarity only making it more valuable. Rimuru and Myourmile had been completely outplayed, but in the end, the most important thing was elsewhere. The merit point system gradually became part of everyday habits, and magical creatures slowly began to grasp the concept of value exchange. It eventually established itself as a true reward system, used alongside standard currency payments, and became a lasting pillar of Tempest's internal economy. And that's not all. In the spin-off The Ways of the Monster Nation, we learn that Tempest even introduced the concept of credit cards. These cards proudly display Rimuru's slime form, along with a magic circle engraved on the surface, and we can see Framea actively using them throughout the story. As for the famous exclusive service right to attend Rimuru, the reward Diablo had monopolized, it turns out that Myourmile regularly shared private meals and drinks with Rimuru on his own, a small arrangement he wisely chose never to mention in front of Diablo. The dungeon is undoubtedly one of the central pillars of Tempest's economy, a profit-generating machine of tremendous power. However, at its opening, as recalled in the first episode of Season 4 of the anime, this 100-floor masterpiece, built with passion by Ramirez and Rimuru, immediately faced an unexpected major issue. The level of the adventurers attempting to challenge it was far below expectations. As a result, reckless challengers were falling in large numbers within the very first rooms. Meanwhile, Veldora, waiting at the bottom as the final boss of the last floor, saw no one reaching him and began sulking out of boredom. The tourism engine was stalled before it had even truly begun. Barely 10% of challengers were able to reach the 10th floor. From the very first and second episodes, the dungeon's management team, led by Rimuru, got to work immediately. Masayuki's advice, driven by his passion for video games, proved invaluable. The addition of a beginner tutorial and the implementation of save points at regular intervals. Then Myourmile business acumen took over. Gold coin rewards for each set of floors cleared and an astronomical prize for anyone capable of conquering the entire dungeon. A powerful advertising strategy designed to attract adventurers in massive numbers. The calculation was as cunning as it was brilliant. With Veldora guarding the 100th floor, total completion was effectively impossible, making the risk of paying out the ultimate reward virtually non-existent. Their cynical yet perfectly executed plan worked flawlessly. The dungeon was soon flooded with adventurers seeking glory and gold. But just as operations began running at full capacity, a new threat emerged. A group of cunning players known as Team Green Fury began systematically exploiting loopholes in the system to progress through fraudulent means. In response, Rimuru, Veldora, and Ramirez held an emergency meeting and improvised a countermeasure in real time: the use of avatars, monster bodies into which they transferred their consciousness to intervene directly within the dungeon. At first, their movements were clumsy. They struggled to adapt to these new physical forms, but very quickly, this formidable trio became a terror of the depths, earning the nickname Dungeon Dominators among adventurers. At the same time, items that provided strategic advantages during dungeon exploration were introduced as premium paid content, ensuring that no potential source of revenue was left untapped. The dungeon entry fee was set at 3 silver coins per run. At the reception area, the items introduced during the major revamp of Season 4 quickly became almost mandatory purchases. The Resurrection Bracelet allows the user to return to life without a single scratch upon death inside the dungeon. 2 silver coins, free on the first use, then paid from the second onward. The Return Whistle allows instant exit from the dungeon, 30 silver coins. The Recording Crystal allows players to save their progress within the dungeon, 1 gold coin. These items represent near-essential investments for any serious adventurer, and the Resurrection Bracelet in particular sells extremely well, becoming a massive source of revenue on its own. The 95th floor has been developed into a safe zone featuring full accommodation facilities. The light novel describes these rooms as being as compact as capsule hotels, while the anime portrays them as noticeably more spacious. The real value of this area lies in 2 things: absolute safety for resting, and above all, perfectly clean restrooms, a luxury worth its weight in gold for mixed groups of adventurers who have been deep inside the dungeon for days. It is also worth noting that Ramirez's intrinsic ability could create an infinitely large space, making the cramped nature of a capsule hotel entirely optional. A night's stay costs 3 silver coins, an affordable price, but additional charges are cleverly applied for laundry, access to large baths, equipment repairs, and many other services, ensuring that each visitor spends a little more money every time. Even better, mercenaries hired by noble families, as well as soldiers from the Eastern Empire, come to challenge the dungeon, attracted by the rare items dropped by defeated monsters and the rewards granted at each milestone. Defeating the boss of the 30th floor can sometimes trigger, at a low probability, the appearance of a randomly generated rare piece of equipment. The Ogre series, a gacha-style loot system worthy of modern mobile games, designed to encourage repeated attempts. Players keep coming back again and again, hoping to complete their collection. All of these carefully layered monetization systems, combined with relentless management, ultimately paid off. The dungeon has become a true golden goose, a profit-generating machine of extraordinary scale that continuously fills Tempest's treasury. To conclude, let's address the question everyone is asking: the estimated income of Rimuru and his top executives. Let's start at the very top of the hierarchy. As the supreme leader of the nation, Rimuru's estimated annual income reaches nothing less than 20.1 billion yen or more. Breaking down this staggering income, Rimuru receives 1 gold coin per day directly from Tempest National Treasury, amounting to approximately 36,500,000 yen per year on its own. On top of that, there are the monthly profits from businesses co-managed with Myourmile, which exceed 100 gold coins per month, bringing in an additional 150 million yen annually. But the most massive source of income comes from dividends paid by an ultra-secret organization operating in the shadows, Riega. These three figures secretly control a significant portion of the global economy. 2% of the astronomical profits generated by this organization is distributed to each founding member, and that share alone represents more than 20 billion yen per year. When all these income sources are combined, Rimuru's total annual earnings easily exceed 21 billion yen, a truly staggering figure. Myourmile, co-founder of Riega and Rimuru's business partner, also earns considerable income from this organization in addition to his official salary from the nation. It is therefore reasonable to estimate that his earnings fall within a very similar range to Rimuru's. Among the other executives whose income is known, we find Benimaru, Rimuru's right-hand man, whose estimated annual income exceeds 120 million yen. His base salary from the National Treasury amounts to 50 gold coins per month, equivalent to 60 million yen per year, to which are added exceptional bonuses and contributions from Riega due to his involvement, bringing his real total well above that baseline. Soe, head of Tempest Intelligence Network and a key pillar of its administration, is estimated to receive compensation equivalent to Benimaru's. As for the other executives, here is how things stand. Gabiru earns most of his income from royalties tied to his research and development patents, a stable and reliable source that ensures him solid financial comfort. Adelman, as the undisputed boss of one of the dungeon's floors, has developed his own method of enrichment. He confiscates equipment from defeated adventurers and resells materials obtained from monsters, accumulating substantial profits. Xion, however, represents a completely different case. She shows absolutely no interest in money, to the point that she only recently owned a wallet and lives in a state of chronic poverty that sharply contrasts with her status as one of Tempest's leading figures. It's important to understand that Tempest executives often personally fund equipment renewals and benefits for their subordinates out of their own pockets. In theory, submitting a request to the nation allows these supplies to be obtained for free, but administrative complexity and endless delays push the wealthier individuals not to wait. As a result, Benimaru, Sue, Gabiru, and Adalman directly pay for their teams without hesitation. Xion, however, cannot afford to do so, which quietly creates real dissatisfaction among her subordinates, a rather unfortunate reality for someone of her standing. That being said, ever since Adelman shared his dungeon monetization methods with her, Xion seems to have found a path worth exploring. Perhaps she will begin hunting the most promising creatures in the depths herself to extract valuable resources. To conclude, a quick word on characters outside the official hierarchy. Veldora, as shown in the anime, does indeed receive gold coins as compensation, earning 1 gold coin per day from the National Treasury, amounting to at least 36,500,000 yen per year. And since he also receives a share of the dungeon's profits, which he co-manages, his actual income is likely double, or even higher. The greatest financial success story in Tempest, however, is without question Ramirez. What is less expected is how sharp she proves to be when it comes to money. As co-manager of the Dungeon Corporation, she earns 20% of the massive profits generated by this profit abyss. According to Rimuru's own calculations, Ramirez's daily share exceeds 20 gold coins, that is, a daily income of 2 million yen, which amounts to 60 million yen per month, and, over the course of a year, the staggering sum of 720 million yen. After deducting the wages of her subordinates working within the dungeon, she still retains at least 100 gold coins per month in disposable income, resulting in an estimated net annual income exceeding 120 million yen. Once mocked as a demon lord with neither wealth nor ambition, she now stands at the head of a fortune that even human rulers would envy. An absolutely meteoric rise. It is also worth noting that Shinji and his companions, the defectors from the Empire who became Ramirez's assistants, receive 3 gold coins per month, in addition to housing, food, and equipment being fully covered. 360,000 yen per year may seem lower than their former military salaries, but for a research position with no life-threatening danger in a welcoming nation that provides all the comfort they never had in the Empire, it is hard to call it a bad deal. There are duos you never see coming, unlikely partnerships that, once formed, prove formidable in more ways than one. Rimuru and Myourmile belong to that very specific category. the kind of individuals you'd be better off never facing in a negotiation, and even less as opponents in an economic war. Two minds built for business, brought together by fate and by a shared taste for bold schemes that make reasonable people raise an eyebrow. Myourmile, whose full name is Guard Myourmile, was no ordinary man even before crossing paths with Demon Lord Rimuru. Dressed in his merchant attire, wearing his neatly groomed mustache and his ever-calculating smile, he had built his commercial empire from the Kingdom of Blumend, that small yet pragmatic nation, wise enough to establish diplomatic relations with the monster nation long before the rest of the world even considered it. This strategic positioning allowed Blumend to gain access to goods of exceptional quality, starting with the high potions produced by Tempest, whose reputation was already well established across the entire continent. It was precisely with the intention of purchasing them in large quantities that Myourmile personally traveled to the monster nation before setting out toward the Kingdom of Ingratia to sell them there. However, the journey would take a very different turn from what he had anticipated. A sky dragon, a rare subspecies of archdragons that failed to evolve into wind dragons and underwent a mutation, attacked his convoy, spreading chaos in its wake. What Myourmile did not yet know at that exact moment was that Rimuru had already heard about this merchant who was buying Tempest's potions in such massive quantities. The rescue that followed was therefore not entirely a coincidence. Rather, the circumstances simply accelerated a meeting that was bound to happen sooner or later. From that point on, the two men began weaving their plans together. Myourmile became involved in several large-scale projects led by Rimuru, notably the establishment of certain rather unconventional businesses, as well as the design and organization of Tempest's founding festival, the grand event meant to introduce the monster nation to the entire world. These collaborations gradually transformed the relationship between the two men, to the point that Myourmile eventually left Blumend to settle permanently in Tempest, a decision heavy with meaning for a man of his standing, but one that clearly showed how much he believed in Rimuru's vision. He was no longer just a passing business partner, he had become a true companion of ambition, an ally who shared the same vision of a world where commerce and prosperity would be the driving forces of change. For Rimuru in particular, Myourmile represented one of the very few individuals truly capable of understanding his passion for business, his love for entrepreneurship, and his desire to build something that goes far beyond the simple framework of a nation of monsters. He was also an essential asset when it came to generating funds that Rimuru could use freely without having to answer to anyone. Within the Jura-Tempest Federation, his role was clear and his scope of influence considerable. Head of financial operations and of the communications and advertising department, he managed both the nation's economic flow and its image toward the outside world. And his personality, direct, impulsive, and willing to take risks where others would hesitate, earned him excellent relationships with Tempest's top executives who might otherwise have been wary of a human in such a high position. Where things become particularly interesting is when we observe Myourmile in a slightly different context. Because from the very first episode of Season 4, attentive observers noticed something unusual in his tone, a slight nervousness, a warmth that contrasted with the calculated composure he usually displays. The reason for this change? Myourmile is an absolute fan of Hiro Masayuki, this man who weighs his words as carefully as he weighs gold, who negotiates without flinching even against the greatest powers, clearly loses part of his usual composure when he finds himself in the same room as the legendary hero whose exploits he had followed in the arenas of Ingratia. The mask of the unshakable merchant cracks, revealing an awestruck fan struggling to contain his excitement. In a way, it's touching. He who crossed paths with Demon Lord Rimuru during the attack of the Sky Dragon and retained a sense of admiration mixed with awe now holds the same fascination for Masayuki. Two exceptional figures for one man, and in both cases, an inexplicable kind of magic seems to be at work. Now, let's go back to what fundamentally connects these two unusual partners. The first common point, and undoubtedly the most obvious, is their love for business and money. But be careful not to reduce this inclination to simple greed, because for them, wealth is not an end in itself. It is a tool, a lever, a concrete expression of their strategic intelligence, serving much greater ambitions. Money is the fuel of dreams. Rimuru seeks to build a world where humans and monsters coexist in peace and prosperity, while Myourmile has set himself the mission of spreading the best things the world has to offer, all while maintaining a stable and virtuous commercial order. These two visions naturally converge toward the same outcome: the growth and influence of Tempest as an unavoidable commercial power in the world. However, while their goals align, their methods differ significantly. Rimuru is a man of intuition and enthusiasm. He enjoys bringing his ideas to life, seeing things take shape in his hands, or rather, his pseudopods. But administrative and repetitive tasks deeply bore him, and he gladly delegates that tedious work to his subordinates. Myourmile, on the other hand, is a practitioner at heart. He excels in negotiation and information gathering, and knows exactly in what order to pull the right levers to turn a bold idea into a concrete and profitable reality. He understands the business world down to its smallest mechanisms and knows how to navigate both its shadows and its bright sides. To illustrate his willingness to get physically involved when necessary, during the demonstrations held in the dungeon, he did not hesitate to subject himself to a staged decapitation in order to prove to the audience the spectacular effects of the resurrection bracelet, a shocking attraction designed to leave a lasting impression and make everyone want to step into the dungeon of the Monster Nation. Every risk was calculated, zero improvisation. In simple terms, Rimuru draws the big picture, sets the horizon. Myourmile builds the road to get there, stone by stone, contract by contract. If they had never met, Tempest's economic development would undoubtedly have taken much longer, and perhaps Rimuru's vision would have remained a dream for a long time, lacking someone capable of executing it at that level. These two were meant to find each other. Admittedly, their collaboration sometimes drifts into excessive escalation and plans that are a bit too ambitious. And Season 4 was quick to give us a particularly telling example of this, with the large-scale advertising strategy deployed around Tempest Dungeon from the very first episode. The dungeon that Tempest opened to the public represented far more than a simple attraction or a training ground for thrill-seeking adventurers. It was a true institution, a new kind of urban entertainment designed to become a lasting part of the Monster Nation's landscape. At the origin of this architectural and magical feat was Ramirez's unique skill, Small World. This extraordinary ability, unique to the Fairy of the Labyrinth, allowed her to construct an entire dimensional structure, 100 carefully designed floors, each representing a distinct dimensional layer where the density of magicules gradually increases as one descends, making the lower levels increasingly difficult to traverse. The construction lasted an entire week, marked by save points installed every 10 floors, before Rimuru, Ramirez, and Veldora themselves added obstacles and traps. Milam even lent a hand for terrain effects and the capture of elemental dragons. Unveiled with great fanfare during Tempest's founding festival, this labyrinth instantly became the iconic jewel of the Monster Nation. A unique place where difficulty could be adjusted at will, where traps and pathways could be reconfigured instantly, and where Ramirez exercised near absolute authority over space and matter. Ramirez also designed special equipment for adventurers, the Resurrection Bracelet, which nullifies death inside the dungeon and returns the user to the entrance with all injuries healed, at the cost of their loot, of course, as well as the return whistle for emergency retreats. However, despite such careful design, the reality on the ground after 3 days of operation was disappointing. Adventurers had barely made any progress in descending the labyrinth. Rimuru and his allies therefore gathered in an emergency meeting to consider solutions. It was Masayuki who proposed adjustments inspired by video games, the addition of a tutorial to guide beginners, the implementation of clearly marked save points, and item recovery systems to make the experience more accessible and appealing. On his side, Myourmile provided a cold and clear commercial analysis. Word of mouth was, for the moment, only reaching low-ranking adventurers, which severely limited the dungeon's reputation. They needed to aim higher, to reach a different category of clientele. It is worth noting Myourmile maintained excellent relations with Soka, who had co-hosted the founding festival alongside him, and that her subordinates were working under his direction to collect reliable data on attendance and visitor feedback. This informal network was a valuable asset for refining the strategy in real time. At the same time, contacts had been established through Hiro Masayuki to spread advertisements across the various regional branches of the Adventurers Guild in order to reach a broader and more targeted audience. But Myourmile didn't stop there. His next proposal was a breathtaking display of commercial boldness. to implement a system of massive rewards, specifically targeting nobles and the wealthy elite. The concept was simple and incredibly effective. A reward granted to anyone who managed to conquer the final floor of the dungeon, set at the astronomical sum of 100 gold coins, an amount equivalent to roughly 1 billion Japanese yen. And to maintain excitement throughout the entire journey, an additional reward would be offered to every adventurer who defeated one of the bosses guarding each 10-floor milestone. The objective was clear: to ignite the pride and competitiveness of the nobles, to turn the assault on the dungeon into a quest for prestige as much as profit, and to transform it into a full-fledged industry capable of generating considerable economic flow. Of course, in reality, reaching the final level to face the ultimate boss, Veldora, let alone defeating him, was absolutely impossible, and the bosses scattered across the intermediate floors were no less formidable. Yet, in the first weeks following the opening, a few particularly determined and talented adventurers managed to progress at a surprisingly fast pace through the upper floors. However, over time, the dungeon began to turn into something Rimuru himself had not entirely anticipated. Without its master's knowledge, a true internal organization started to emerge among the labyrinth's creatures, a hierarchy of elite guardians that would eventually come to be known as the 10 Great Wonders of the Dungeon. At their head, beings of terrifying power took position on the deepest floors. Adelman, Lord of Gehenna, stood watch over the 70th floor and its depths, within that vast and grim space known as Deathtopia, the Kingdom of the Dead. Even deeper, on the 80th floor, Zegion established himself as a guardian, this insect with a black demonic steel exoskeleton modified by Raphael himself, whose combat power rivaled that of the most formidable beings in all of Tempest. With guardians of that caliber stationed at such advanced levels, it was only natural that traffic in the deeper floors dropped drastically. No sane adventurer wanted to venture into that corridor of death. But contrary to what one might expect, the overall attendance of the dungeon did not decline, because even the early floors offered rewards attractive enough to justify the effort. The magic crystals and rare equipment obtained from the labyrinth's monsters represented valuable loot, capable of transforming the fortune of an ordinary adventurer. Those who had experienced this opportunity found themselves irresistibly drawn back to it. This is precisely what Volume 13.5 of the light novel illustrates in a very concrete way through the story of the team, Desert Wind. A group of adventurers who had found their economic balance by repeatedly clearing the 4th and 5th floors of the dungeon, generating enough income to afford an entire month's stay in Tempest. A stable and profitable lifestyle, achievable without having to descend into the depths of the labyrinth, and the money earned through hard exploration had a hard time staying in their pockets. Because Tempest, a vibrant and commercial city, was full of irresistible temptations, splendid clothing and fashion shops, a cuisine that existed nowhere else in the world, shows and battles in the arena. As strange as it may seem, the dungeon and the city formed a perfectly coherent economic ecosystem. Adventurers spent in the city what they earned in the labyrinth, thus fueling Tempest's economic engine in a steady and almost involuntary way. These noble financial sacrifices therefore served a purpose. One of the moments where Myourmile would be called upon in a particularly intense way is closely tied to the birth of what could be called Tempest's culinary route. In this world where gastronomy is a luxury inaccessible to the vast majority of the population, sophisticated culinary recipes simply do not exist naturally. And ramen, this iconic dish born from the meeting between Chinese cuisine and Japanese culinary ingenuity, a symbol of a popular food culture that had reached its peak in Rimuru's former world, was of course completely unknown in this parallel universe. And yet it was in this very world that it would be born, thanks to the perseverance and ingenuity of Rimuru and those around him. The spark behind this culinary adventure is a delicious irony. During a meeting concerning how to deal with the Kingdom of Farmus, Shion accidentally said the word ramen while trying to name raisin, a slip of the tongue that immediately brought back to Rimuru the vivid memory of this dish from his past life. The idea took root in his mind with the force of an obsession, and the challenge of recreating this meal in a world that had never even heard of it was set in motion. But the obstacles were numerous. It was necessary to identify, within this world, the closest possible ingredients to those that make up real ramen. which meant searching through markets and reserves across the entire known continent. That is where Myourmiles stepped in, mobilizing his vast commercial network to source the appropriate raw materials as close as possible to the original ingredients. Rimuru, for his part, could mentally reconstruct the recipe within his stomach and validate its proportions and flavors, but that ability alone was not enough to open a restaurant. A real cook was needed, capable of reproducing the dish for a real and demanding clientele. The choice then fell on Gobuichi, the hobgoblin trained under Shuna's tutelage, who had become Tempest's best cook after his master. Rimuru himself acknowledges that entrusting this task to Shuna would have been simpler and more efficient, but had deliberately chose to spare her, while giving Gobuichi the opportunity to benefit from this project. A team was then formed, with Gobuichi at its head as the culinary project leader. After transmitting to him, from the memories of his past life, the very essence of ramen, Rimuru gave him complete freedom to carry the initiative forward. However, contrary to what his own account might suggest, the process was far from simple. In the manga, the difficulties are very real. The strong smell of tonkatsu broth disturbs the locals, and when Gobuichi tries to fix this by purifying the bones, the result loses flavor and becomes bland. Finding the right balance becomes a real challenge. On top of that comes a major constraint: the diversity of the dungeon and Tempest's clientele. Each race has its own preferences, as shown by the incident involving a fishman shocked by a seafood ramen where he feels as though he is consuming his own kind. Far from being discouraged, Gobuichi uses every piece of feedback to improve, adjusting noodles to match the broths and even offering variations to suit different sensitivities. What seemed like a quick success is in reality a long struggle made of trials, errors, and constant adjustments. But his efforts eventually pay off, his skills improve, and he is rewarded with new utensils, a symbol of his success. In the end, Tempest offers a complete menu: soy sauce, miso, tonkotsu, chicken broth, and seafood variations. A success so great that even Hinata Sakaguchi loses her composure at the first bite, followed by Holy Knights who are equally won over. With Myourmile handling the strategy, expansion begins, restaurants multiply, and profits flow directly into Rimuru-esque coffers. But for the Demon Lord of Tempest, this is only the beginning. And as good food inevitably attracts skilled individuals, other cooks and culinary artisans begin to flock in, bringing their own specialties and enriching the gastronomic offerings of this commercial axis. One can easily imagine Rimuru and Myourmile, their eyes shining as they look upon the spectacle of that golden prosperity they had helped build together. Meanwhile, Rimuru had made a crucial discovery regarding a particular property of Ramirez's intrinsic skill, Small World. Beyond its primary function of creating and managing the labyrinth, this extraordinary ability was actually capable of projecting all internal information of the dungeon in the form of highly precise, three-dimensional images. Everything happening on each floor, battles, explorations, triggered traps, defeats, and victories, could be captured and displayed in real time as detailed visual sequences. Ramirez herself had long ignored and discarded this data due to its sheer volume, far beyond what she could process alone. It was by granting Rimuru access to her small world skill that this vast source of information became usable, and it was Raphael who fully transformed the potential of these images into a concrete reality by analyzing them, evaluating them, and making them perfectly accessible. Rimuru could now closely monitor everything taking place in the depths of his labyrinth, a strategic surveillance capability of invaluable worth for the management and evolution of the dungeon. But Raphael did not stop there. With the creative genius that defines this entity of seemingly limitless resources, the ultimate skill took on an entirely different role, that of a content editor. By selecting the most spectacular moments captured within the labyrinth's floors, assembling the most impressive battle sequences, and the most striking moments of bravery, Raphael created true audiovisual works from the raw material produced by the dungeon. A new form of entertainment had just been born in this world, and it would achieve tremendous success. Adventurers whose exploits were broadcast to the public saw their popularity skyrocket, their reputation cross borders, and some even experienced unexpected changes in their romantic lives due to this sudden media exposure. The massive screen displayed during the founding festival had already demonstrated the power of images over crowds in this world, but this phenomenon went much further. It established an entirely new culture where individual performances could influence social status, personal relationships, and the entire course of one's life. Without this image-based revolution, the feats of adventurers would have remained confined to word of mouth and the written records of guilds, a slow, limited, and ultimately far less profitable form of dissemination. One of the moments that would leave a lasting impression in this emerging industry was the broadcast of the battle between hero Masayuki and the Tempest Serpent stationed as the guardian of the 40th floor, a monster of A- rank, known for its devastating poison breath, capable of wiping out a group of careless adventurers in an instant. The footage of this confrontation, projected through magical display equipment, caused a sensation and greatly contributed to amplifying the already considerable reputation of the dungeon. Masayuki himself signed an exclusive contract, with earnings worthy of his legendary status. Rimuru and Myourmile had every reason to be pleased. As usual, Rimuru delegated all the tedious yet essential procedures to Myourmile: broadcasting rights, image rights, contractual negotiations with the adventurers whose feats were selected for distribution, all of the legal and commercial machinery that Rimuru neither had the interest nor the patience to handle. Myourmile, however, did not see it as a burden. He saw it as an opportunity. The image industry had just been born in this world, and this was only the beginning. These same visual projection capabilities derived from Small World were not used solely for entertainment or commercial promotion. They were quickly integrated as strategic tools by the Holy Knights, who used them to analyze their own combat techniques, identify their weaknesses, and refine their engagement tactics. Recorded battle scenes from the dungeon thus became true educational material, and this military use of visual data would later be confirmed on a much larger scale during the war against the Eastern Empire, where real-time battlefield surveillance through this method gave Tempest a considerable tactical advantage over its enemies, an innovation whose impact on the outcome of battles was far from negligible. But let's return to a softer, more refined aspect of the life Rimuru leads. Among his favorite spots in the dwarven kingdom of Dwargen, one held a special place in the Demon Lord's heart, the Butterflies of the Night, an elegant cabaret establishment run by elves. These hostesses, with their attentive ears and carefully crafted smiles, knew how to provide a refined and intimate atmosphere, far removed from the turmoil of governance and warfare. Rimuru had actually discovered the Butterflies of the Night during his very first visit to Dwargen, long before becoming a demon lord, back when he was still a curious little slime navigating a world unfamiliar to him. A similar establishment also existed in Ingratia, managed by Myourmile himself, and in a way that was not entirely intentional. Rimuru found himself enjoying it alongside his students during one of his visits to the capital, a situation that turned out to be more amusing than problematic. It was from this constant fascination with such establishments that Rimuru naturally developed the desire to one day open an elf-based venue in Tempest, his own Night Butterfly, under his own banner. The realization of this dream came through a rather sordid affair triggered during the preparations for the founding festival. When Rimuru went to meet Myourmile to request his collaboration in organizing the festivities, he arrived in the middle of a visit from Viscount Kazak. This questionable individual had the audacity to propose something utterly unacceptable to Myourmile, acquiring elves as slaves for commercial purposes, a proposition that was not only deeply inhumane and morally repugnant, but also politically explosive. High-ranking elves maintained direct ties with the magic dynasty of Sarion, and any such dealings risked triggering a major international diplomatic incident. Myourmile, being a shrewd man who had no need for that kind of trouble, initially brushed off the proposal while internally noting that the situation smelled far too dangerous. Then Rimuru made his entrance, and the tone shifted immediately. Kazak, far from being impressed by the presence of the Demon Lord, foolishly made a condescending remark, suggesting that he might be willing to take Rimuru under his wing. This insult, directed at the Demon Lord of Tempest and, in Myourmile's eyes, both his savior and trusted partner, was the final straw. Myourmile's anger erupted with absolute firmness. He threw Kazak out on the spot, definitively ending their business relationship. At least, the incident had one benefit. It brought to Rimuru's attention the existence of an entire network involved in elf trafficking. Sui was immediately tasked with conducting a thorough investigation. The inquiry fortunately led to the rescue and protection of all the elves involved. The question then arose, what should be done with these freed elves? How could they be given a dignified, secure life that respected their autonomy? The answer was both practical and perfectly aligned with Myourmiles' ambitions. An establishment reserved for elves was opened on the 95th floor of the dungeon, a refined space carefully designed where elven hostesses welcomed their guests in a luxurious and soothing setting. Access to the establishment was restricted, reserved for premium members, nobles, and influential figures capable of qualifying to enter this privileged circle. It was, to put it plainly, a completely respectable place where all participants were true gentlemen. As the number of adventurers continued to grow over time, a second establishment aimed at a less elite but equally dedicated clientele was later opened alongside it. The 95th floor had, in fact, become an extraordinary place in itself, a haven of luxury and pleasure nestled within the very heart of the labyrinth, accessible only to those who had survived the previous 94 floors with enough resources to enjoy it. And Rimuru, as a true expert in tourism dynamics, had deliberately set the establishment's prices well above the standard rate, because there is a universal law in commerce. Prices rise wherever people are willing to pay more for a unique experience. Adventurers who had risked their lives to accumulate magic crystals and rare equipment did not hesitate to spend generously once they reached this floor. The hard-earned money gathered in the depths of the dungeon was thus effortlessly drained on the 95th floor, and to replenish their funds, they dove back into the labyrinth. A perfect economic cycle, both diabolical and efficient, spinning endlessly like a well-oiled wheel. A golden trap designed and maintained by the duo Rimuru and Myourmile with a level of skill that can only be described as genius. Among the other personal uses Rimuru made of this establishment, one example stands out in particular. Gobuta, the loyal yet unfortunate goblin soldier, was regularly taken to the Special Members Club as a reward whenever Rimuru wanted to motivate him to put in extra effort, a way of managing his human resources that says a lot about the Demon Lord's pragmatic ingenuity. Ever since Rimuru ascended to the rank of Demon Lord, the Jura-Tempest Federation has continued expanding its territory while strengthening its influence across every corner of the continent. Its alliances with neighboring nations, combined with the explosive growth of its markets and the irresistible attraction of its wealth, have transformed it into the undeniable nerve center of the global economy. A reality that even the most powerful secret organizations can no longer afford to underestimate. The founding festival marked a major turning point in this collective realization. Individuals disguised as merchants or travelers, but in truth spies dispatched by the major factions, poured into Tempest from every direction with a single mission: evaluate Demon Lord Rimuru's personality and measure the level of development of his nation. What they witnessed convinced every last one of them without exception. A new era was being born right before their eyes. Faced with such an overwhelming reality, these rival forces were left with only two options: opposition or submission. But every attempt at intimidation proved to be as futile as it was suicidal. This unanimous conclusion forced all of these factions to completely redirect their strategies toward one single priority: earning the favor of Demon Lord Rimuru. And honestly, it made perfect sense, because at this stage, the military power under Rimuru's command had reached absolutely terrifying proportions. Let me paint the full picture for you by imagining a hostile organization foolish enough to launch a direct assault on Tempest during the founding festival itself. On the front lines stands an overwhelming army composed of countless hobgoblins, Tempest wolves, and orcs, all of whom evolved thanks to Rimuru's naming process, a radical transformation that drastically amplifies their natural abilities. On top of that, the Oni and the Tempest Wolves operate in perfectly synchronized pairs, forming elite combat units whose coordination and battle training have reached a truly terrifying level. This force alone already creates an absolutely immeasurable gap compared to the ordinary soldiers of neighboring nations. The difference is simply beyond comparison. And even if an enemy somehow managed to break through this first line of defense, they would immediately find themselves face to face with the commanders leading each military corps. In reality, Benimaru would most likely have already reorganized and repositioned the troops long beforehand, and if the dungeon forces were added into the equation, the situation would become even more absurd. But commanders such as Gerudo, Hakaru, or Gabiru, just to name a few, are genuine monsters of raw power, beings capable of rivaling demon lords in direct combat. No nation under the protection of a demon lord, nor even a coalition of human kingdoms, could truly stand against them. And if, by some absurd miracle, an enemy actually survived all of those battles, they would still have to deal with the possible intervention of Milim, Rimuru's loyal ally, along with Carrion and Frey, former demon lords who had since fallen under his sphere of influence, or even Hinata, whose relationship with Rimuru had drastically improved shortly before these events and who could descend onto the battlefield as reinforcements at any moment. Anyone capable of reaching that stage would, without question, already rank among the most terrifying fighters in the entire known world. But what awaited them beyond that point was nothing short of absolute despair, because beyond that line stand fighters of an entirely different class altogether. Individuals on the level of awakened demon lords such as Benimaru, Xion, and Diablo, whose power surpasses ordinary demon lords to an almost absurd degree. And in the infinitely unlikely scenario where someone somehow broke through even that final wall, two ultimate pillars would still be waiting at the very end of the road: Rimuru himself and Veldora, only beings on the level of Guy Crimson or Milim, entities who stand even above awakened demon lords, could ever hope to reach that final stage. And on top of all that comes another massive obstacle. Anyone seeking to challenge Rimuru would first have to conquer the dungeon designed by Ramirez herself, a labyrinth whose complexity and lethality are far beyond normal comprehension. Simply reaching the heart of the nation is practically impossible from the very beginning. That, then, was Tempest's military power during the founding festival. Just a brief overview, really. I'll make another dedicated video later covering the full military might of the monster nation in detail. It becomes painfully obvious that entering into a hostile relationship with this nation was nothing short of collective suicide. And yet, a handful of exceptionally reckless individuals still dared to threaten Tempest, ultimately gambling away their own existence in the process. The Kingdom of Ingracia. The Kingdom of Ingracia is one of the great powers at the center of the Western nations, and its influence is easy to understand given the concentration of critically important institutions located within its territory. Among them are the headquarters of the Council of the West, the main headquarters of the Free Guild, and the operational center of the Western Holy Church. And to clarify an important point regarding the Free Guild, it was originally a complete restructuring of the old Adventurers Cooperative Guild, entirely reorganized and rebuilt by Yuki Kagurazuka. From the moment he arrived in this world, Yuki put the genius he already possessed before his transmigration to work in service of his ambitions. Drawing upon knowledge from the modern world, he began negotiating trade and diplomatic agreements with various nations, establishing mutual cooperation treaties, and building from scratch an entirely unprecedented commercial and political system. At the end of this meteoric rise, he proclaimed himself Grand Master and consolidated his control over the very structure he had personally created. However, this rise did not come without a price. It was the Rosso clan that provided the initial funding he desperately needed, placing him under a debt with enormous consequences. Before long, he found himself carrying out the clan's dirty work behind the scenes, manipulated from within, and trapped in a state of semi-dependence he could never truly escape from. And considering that the very headquarters of the Council of the West, the institution supposedly responsible for arbitrating the major decisions of the Western nations, was itself firmly controlled by the Rosso clan, the situation becomes far less surprising. Beyond politics, the Kingdom of Ingracia is also culturally distinguished by its many centers of entertainment and knowledge. The nation possesses libraries, theaters, luxurious storefronts worthy of the greatest cities, and an educational institution known as the Freedom Academy. Before Tempest's rise to power, Ingracia was undoubtedly the most advanced human nation, the place where human civilization shined in all its glory. But behind this facade of refinement and prosperity lies a far darker reality. Because while the Kingdom of Ingracia does possess its official and publicly known organization, the Royal Knights, it also conceals within its depths a far more disturbing faction, the Magic Inquisitors, who operate directly under King Aegel's command. These individuals are bound to absolute secrecy, and for good reason. What they know and what they carry out in the shadows represent the darkest side of the Kingdom of Ingracia. If their existence were ever exposed to the public, the credibility and reputation of the entire nation would collapse instantly. Their role is to oversee, in the king's name, research of an utterly sinister nature the incorporation of demonic and monstrous factors into the human body. Volume 19 of the light novel revealed the full extent of their work, and the conclusion was horrifying. These are human experiments where the subjects are treated as nothing more than disposable objects, atrocities rivaling the worst horrors imaginable. These researchers seek to implant the power of demons into human bodies. However, their fundamental theory is built upon a deeply flawed and completely twisted line of reasoning. They believe that raw physical power is all that truly matters, focusing entirely on bodily modification, while assuming that the mental aspect can simply be compensated for by allowing a demon to coexist inside the subject's body. But this theory is completely meaningless for one simple reason. They cultivate cells infused with demonic factors and inject them into their test subjects, hoping that a demon's power will settle within them. The reality, however, is entirely different. A demon incarnates through the strength of its own will, and once incarnated, it completely takes over the body, serving as its vessel. In other words, no matter how many demonic cells they cultivate and inject, the demon simply claims the body entirely for itself, rendering the entire experimental protocol utterly and irreversibly useless. And the result? A living hell where failed experiments endlessly repeat themselves in a hopeless cycle with no escape and no end. Among the test subjects were major criminals sentenced to death, something that could at least be rationalized, even if it remains morally questionable. But the fact that children were also selected for these experiments is absolutely unforgivable, regardless of whatever justification might be offered. And yet, the researchers who stubbornly continue these experiments without end, along with the institution of magic inquisitors that supervises them, truly represent the deepest, most secretive, and most sinister shadow hidden within the kingdom of Ingrassia. It is also important to mention that this institution was originally created as a counterbalance against the Rosso clan, and that every single one of its members exceeds rank A, making it the most powerful armed group within the kingdom of Ingrassia. And for reference, they first appeared in episode 6 of season 4 of the anime. The Holy Empire of Ruberios. Located in the western part of the continent, the Holy Empire of Ruberios is a massive theocratic nation of tremendous importance. It serves as the central headquarters of the Church of Luminous, which worships the one and only goddess Luminous. Within its borders coexist numerous factions with different interests and responsibilities. The Holy Knights, the Rook Genius, and the Clerics of the Seven Luminaries, among others. All of these forces are overseen by the Holy See, where the Pope resides as the acting representative of the goddess Luminous. Through these various factions, they protect humanity day and night from the threat of monsters. But behind this role as humanity's radiant shield hides a truth that absolutely no one outside the nation must ever learn. Ruberios harbors a secret legion of vampires that never reveals itself to the public eye. On the surface, Ruberios presents itself as a religious nation that officially refuses to acknowledge the existence of monsters. In reality, however, this position is nothing more than a carefully maintained facade, because the vampires have every reason to ensure that the humans living under their protection lead happy and fulfilling lives, since blood infused with happiness is precisely the most precious and refined nourishment for their kind. And the true sovereign ruling Ruberios from the shadows is none other than the Queen of Nightmares herself, Demon Lord Luminous Valentine, the one true goddess Luminous in person. Ruberios is therefore a nation built upon a dual structure. On the surface, humans live ordinary lives beneath the banner of the Church of Luminous, but beneath their feet, deep underground, stretches an entire city devoted to vampires, Night Garden. It is within this Night Garden that the three archdukes reside, the great ancestors among vampire kind. Gunther Strauss, the original ancestor, the oldest vampire of them all, and Luminous's unwavering servant. Louis Valentine, known by the feared title of Holy Emperor, who publicly carries out official duties. And Roy Valentine, Louis's younger brother, who played the role of the evil demon lord in order to keep the human nations living in fear and guide them toward the religion of Luminous, until Laplace killed him at the end of season 2 of the anime. Since then, what was once known as the Three Archdukes now consists of only 2 active members. Ruberios also possesses the Bloody Knights, an elite force composed of 400 vampires who all surpass rank A, as well as 7 individuals known as the Surmounters. These vampires succeeded in overcoming their race's inherent weakness to sunlight, an absolutely extraordinary feat. According to Rimuru himself, their strength is comparable to that of demon lords. And to finish on a more recent lore update, the clerics of the 7 luminaries have been completely exterminated. As for the 10 great saints, 3 of them ended up scattered to the winds. Sari and Grigori were taken in by Raisin of the Kingdom of Pharmus, while Glenda was brought under Sway's wing within Tempest. And it was later revealed that even Ruberios itself had not escaped this reality. The nation of the goddess Luminous had also been infiltrated from within by the Rosso clan. The Rosso clan, situated between the Kingdom of Pharmus and the Kingdom of Ingracia, and bordered by the icy waters of the Northern Sea, Siltrosso is a small nation governed under an absolute monarchy. Its population of roughly 2 million people may not be particularly large, but the country possesses strong industries in both finance and craftsmanship, while also serving as a relay nation within regional trade networks. At the head of Siltrosso stands the Rosso royal family, led by the former hero Mariabell Rosso. But this family does not operate as a mere ordinary government. For generations, they have pursued an ambition far greater and far more sinister: to dominate the entire world through economic control. When Tempest began its meteoric rise, the Rosso clan immediately recognized it as a direct threat to its ambitions and started monitoring it closely. They even attempted to eliminate Rimuru and Hinata simultaneously, but the operation ended in complete failure. To achieve their goals, the Rosso clan commands a group of loyal subordinates forming a covert operational unit, the Blood Shadow. These shadow agents operate under the highest level of secrecy. The clan also makes use of a particular summoning technique to secure a military force composed of individuals from other worlds, forced into servitude through a curse engraved deep within their very souls. Among the 10 great saints, Glenda is one such otherworlder, directly summoned by Mariabell and bound to him by a loyalty rooted in the depths of her being. Furthermore, it was the Rosso clan itself that founded the Council of the West, the Council of Western Nations. Its influence stretches across major powers such as Pharmus and Ingracia. Within the council, many seats are occupied by individuals directly affiliated with the Rosso clan, and standing at the center of this hidden influence are elderly figures known as the 5 Elders. These men discreetly interfere in every decision capable of affecting their interests, skillfully maneuvering events so that every discussion inevitably turns in their favor. In short, the Rosso clan is nothing less than a bloodline of shadow rulers deeply rooted throughout all the Western nations. The Council of the West. The Council of the West is an international organization that brings together the nations located west of the continent in the region surrounding the Great Jura Forest. Founded through the efforts of Mariabell Rosso, it was officially established with a dual purpose: counter the threats posed by monsters and the Eastern Empire, while also serving as a mediating body to resolve conflicts between the Western nations. Its meetings are held once every month within the Kingdom of Ingracia. Although the organization officially presents itself as an auxiliary institution built upon equality between its members, the truth is entirely different. The amount of financial contributions made by each nation directly determines the number of representatives it is allowed to elect, and therefore its actual level of influence within the assembly. The imbalance between member nations is therefore structural and intentionally designed from the very beginning, and we saw this clearly only seconds after Rimuru's arrival in episode 5 of season 4 of the anime. In addition, the Council of the West serves as the primary financial backer of the Free Guild led by Yuki. In practical terms, this means that the rewards paid to adventurers affiliated with the Free Guild actually come from the Council itself, granting it almost unlimited authority to issue orders to the organization. This was precisely the leverage Mariabell and Mariabell used, turning Yuki into their pawn in an attempt to lure Tempest into a trap. And since combating monsters was the Council's primary purpose, Tempest's rise to power represented an anomaly that its representatives simply could not ignore. Every delegate voiced their own opinions and conflicting interests, yet a consensus eventually emerged. In order to prepare for the threat posed by the Eastern Empire, gaining the favor of the Demon Lord had become a strategic necessity. However, the treaty they proposed was so openly arrogant and exploitative toward Tempest that even Rimuru himself was stunned by it, while Shuna erupted into such intense fury that the atmosphere of the entire assembly completely shifted. It was then officially acknowledged that attempting to use military force against a demon lord was as pointless as it was suicidal, and Tempest was formally admitted into the Council of the West. But behind the facade of this international institution, it was truly the Rosso clan and its 5 elders who were pulling the strings from the shadows. It should nevertheless be noted that this all-powerful clan would eventually be dismantled by Rimuru as well. For centuries, the Rosso family had exercised absolute and discrete control over the Western nations from its stronghold in the Kingdom of Siltroso. Mariabell Rosso, head of the family and central figure among the 5 elders, was not merely a king among others. He was the hidden architect of the entire underground economy of the Western nations. Through his agents embedded within the various member nations, he controlled the Western Council and maintained complete dominance over organized crime across the region. But this meticulously constructed system, built over decades of manipulation and corruption, began to crack and eventually collapse with the rise of Tempest. The gradual fall of the Rosso family and its 5 elders left behind a massive vacuum in the control of the Western underworld, a vacuum that could not be left to descend into chaos without consequences. The work of Testarossa. Testarossa, formerly known as Blanc the White Primordial, is not only one of the primordials but one of the most powerful among them, ranked second after Guy Crimson in the birth order of the 7 primordials. It would seem that her occasional training sessions with Zijian inside the dungeon have contributed to making her a figure of absolute terror in the eyes of the seasoned warriors who train there, a fear bordering on obsession. But Testarossa is not merely an overwhelmingly powerful combatant. Professionally speaking, her efficiency is absolute. She constantly anticipates Rimuru's needs and acts with flawless precision before he even has to voice a single request. And to make matters even more absurd, her talents extend all the way to the art of black tea, where she even surpasses Shuna herself. When compared to Xion and Diablo, who officially serve as Rimuru's secretaries, it becomes obvious that Testarossa would by far be the most qualified of the 3 to hold that position. Rimuru himself holds her intelligence in extremely high regard, to the point of appointing her as diplomatic and military attaché, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and sending her to represent Tempest within the Council of the West. It must be said that demons, by nature, place tremendous importance on contracts and are absolute masters when it comes to exploiting loopholes and legal subtleties, making them terrifying opponents in any negotiation. The very first time Testarossa attended a meeting of the Council of the West, she wasted no time demonstrating exactly what she was capable of. She exposed the corruption of a noble from a minor nation, Johann Rostea, Duke of the Kingdom of Rostea, who had secretly been using magical communication to order the destruction of the city's protective barrier, and she cornered him in a manner that was both elegant and utterly merciless. But the situation became even more spectacular when the supporters of that traitor attempted to summon their divinity, only to bring forth Misery, the green primordial serving under Guy Crimson. Misery found herself standing face to face with Testarossa, and the 2 spoke to each other as complete equals. And once the members of the council fully grasped the meaning of what they had just witnessed, a primordial treating Testarossa as her equal, the conclusion became unavoidable. In terms of both military power and political intelligence, nobody within the council could rival Testarossa. Her position within the council instantly became untouchable, and Tempest's domination over the West was fully established. Her missions did not end there. Later on, she was appointed as an observer attached to the 1st Army Corps led by Gobuta during the war against the Eastern Empire, before eventually being named commander of the Western Deployment Army, the military force affiliated with the Council of the West, which also distinguished itself through disaster relief operations and civil engineering projects. Through all of these responsibilities, Testarossa continuously brings concrete and lasting benefits to Tempest. But calming things in the short term did not address the core issue. What should be done with all those individuals who had gravitated around the world of organized crime, who had known nothing but that system their entire lives, and who suddenly found themselves without structure, without protection, and without prospects? The case of Glenda, formerly a mercenary in service to the Rosso family, once bound to them by a curse of constraint, freed thanks to Rimuru and later aligned with Tempest, perfectly illustrated the problem. Someone who has been involved in criminal activities carries with them a reputation and potential enemies. If this type of profile multiplied across an entire region, the most fragile nations would quickly be overwhelmed. unable to handle such a mass of desperate individuals in search of structure. The void left by the Rosso family and its 5 elders risked turning into a social powder keg ready to explode. The response to this colossal challenge took the form of a plan as bold as it was effective. Since a structure was needed to contain and channel all this criminal energy without letting it dissolve into uncontrolled chaos, Rimuru and Myourmiles simply decided to create the largest criminal organization in the West themselves. Not to turn it into a hub of crime, but on the contrary, to use it as a framework that would redirect desperate individuals toward legitimate paths, prevent them from falling into delinquency, and offer the most talented among them a future worthy of their abilities. To rule the darkness in order to control it, that was the philosophy behind the plan. It was during a rather lively drinking night that the genesis of all this took shape. Elmesia El-Ru Sarion, the empress of the magic dynasty of Sarion, whose influence alone rivaled that of all the Western nations combined, and whose audience usually required years of waiting even for kings, found herself sharing drinks at the same table as Rimuru and Myourmile. What began as a relatively composed conversation quickly drifted into confidences normally reserved for those in whom one has absolute trust. State secrets blended with grand ambitions. Alcohol loosened both minds and tongues, and the 3 individuals gathered around that table discovered that they not only shared the same analysis of the state of the world, but also the same taste for radical and creative solutions. The understanding was immediate and complete. The 3 wise drunks were born. Myourmile, impressed by Elmesia's sharp analytical mind and blade-like intellect, did not hesitate to address her with surprising familiarity, calling her Big Sister, a sincere and affectionate title he gave her. Had King Gazelle witnessed that scene, he would have instantly lost his legendary composure. What could have remained a simple barroom conversation was propelled at incredible speed by the fact that 2 of the 3 participants were top-tier heads of state. The major decisions made that night were translated into concrete actions with astonishing rapidity. In just a few months, all criminal organizations in the West had been unified under a single structure. The secret society Riega was born. Its name formed from the first syllable of each of its 3 founders in abbreviated form. Ri for Rimuru, E for Elmesia, Ga for guard. Those who did not know the origin of the name assumed it meant 3 wise drunks, an interpretation that in truth was not entirely wrong. The reality is that its founders were literally drinking when they laid its foundations. Riga welcomed into its ranks the outcasts, unemployed mercenaries, and individuals with compromised reputations who no longer had a place in official society. Glenda Atlee, former commander of the Blood Shadow, freed from the Rosso family's curse and aligned with Tempest, found her place within this structure. Captain Gerard, former leader of a mercenary company, along with his loyal subordinate Ayn, also contributed to it. All of them, without exception, had a role to play in this underground system meticulously orchestrated from above. But the genius of this plan did not stop at the underworld. To prevent a single organization from concentrating too much power and eventually becoming corrupted from within, which is the inevitable fate of any monopoly, Rimuru designed a dual structure for the public and legitimate face of his economic empire. 2 major commercial organizations were created to dominate the Western nations' market, and they were deliberately set in competition against each other. The first, the 4 Nations Trade Alliance, brought together the Kingdom of Blumend, the Kingdom of Farmenus, the Dwarven Kingdom of Dwargen, and Tempest under the official leadership of Myourmile as CEO. The second, the Western General Trading, was established behind the scenes by Elmesia and officially placed under the leadership of Figaro Ros Doran, a survivor of the Rosso family, a strategic choice that granted the organization inherited legitimacy and an existing network, while discreetly placing it under the control of the trio. This survivor of the Rosso lineage had clearly understood the situation. Anyone who dared to oppose an alliance between a demon lord destined to dominate the world and a celestial empress whose influence spans an entire continent would find only one outcome at the end of that resistance: disappearance. The pragmatic intelligence inherited from the Rosso family proved its worth. No matter which of the 2 organizations prevailed commercially, the profits would ultimately flow back to Riga, and at the top of the pyramid, to its 3 smiling founders, a perfectly compartmentalized system, perfectly sealed, perfectly profitable. The smiles shared by the 3 accomplices spoke volumes about their satisfaction. Myourmile, for his part, had accomplished in just a few years a transformation that would have astonished anyone who had known him in his early days as a simple merchant in Bloomund. On the surface, he remained that affable, jovial businessman, always smiling beneath his neatly groomed mustache. Beneath that, he had become one of the most powerful and influential individuals on the continent, financial director of Tempest, representative of the Four Nations Trade Alliance, co-founder of Riega, and shadow master of the Western Underworld, a dual identity that very few people suspected. Since their very first meeting, Myourmile had sensed something in Rimuru that went beyond the ordinary, a nearly divine figure that his instincts had immediately recognized as exceptional. But reality went far beyond what he had imagined. Rimuru would become a member of the Octagram, the alliance of the 8 greatest demon lords in the world. He was the sworn ally of the storm dragon Veldora. Each new revelation left Myourmile with the same impression. His master was not simply a powerful being, he was a force of nature. And yet this same master entrusted him with the management of state affairs, the operation of hamburger, ramen, and teppanyaki franchises, and even the emerging project of an ice cream shop with the same calm trust given to someone whose reliability is never questioned. The revenues generated by Riega itself were far from insignificant, adding to a portfolio of activities that made Myourmile, the man who had started at the age of 7 selling vegetables just to survive, one of the richest and most influential humans in recorded history. The confidentiality surrounding all of this was absolute and perfectly controlled. Within the entire monster nation, only 2 individuals knew that Rimuru, Myourmile, and Elmesia were in fact the 3 heads of Riega, Benimaru, and Sowe. The former had been informed directly by Rimuru, with a touch of irony, since one of the reasons given was to make sure that Shuna would not learn about certain activities of her lord, which essentially meant recruiting the older brother to keep an eye on the younger sister. Sowe, on the other hand, had inevitably learned the secret through his own subordinates, whom Myourmile had borrowed for field operations. Only 2 people in an entire nation, and that was no coincidence. It said everything about the rigor and seriousness with which the 3 of them approached their discrete conquest of the world. To successfully handle the official and public side of this massive project, Myourmile needed human resources worthy of the task. Managing a trade alliance involving 4 nations, negotiating with sovereign rulers, overseeing economic flows on a continental scale, all of this required trustworthy and talented individuals in sufficient numbers. But such profiles are rare, especially when one refuses to entrust secret operations to unknown individuals. Myourmile shared this difficulty with Rimuru, who then introduced him to Testarossa, the White Primordial. With her breathtaking beauty and deceptively gentle smile, momentarily unsettled the seasoned merchant. He who had negotiated with kings and generals without losing his composure was reduced to the awkwardness of a beginner in front of a woman of such supernatural grace. Yet the moment Testarossa took charge, Myourmile realized, with a mix of admiration and fear, that the plan was advancing at a speed that felt anything but natural. His teams worked with a level of devotion that left no doubt about the influence Testarossa held over them. A single smile from her was enough to turn anyone into a zealous servant ready to move mountains. Meanwhile, Myourmile himself handled direct negotiations with various royal courts, which was no small task. But he could not help being impressed by the human machine Testarossa had set in motion. An unexpected friendship also formed between Myourmile and Cien, one of Testarossa's subordinates. It all began with a sincere remark from Myourmile, openly expressing his admiration for those who had the chance to work under someone as exceptional as Testarossa. Cien, usually cold and impeccably serious, took the comment as a high-level joke and burst into laughter, revealing a side of his personality that very few had ever seen. Since then, the 2 men would occasionally share a drink together, bonding over an unlikely camaraderie between the most powerful merchant in the West and the subordinate of the most feared demon in the world. It was only later that Myourmile learned the truth about Testarossa, and that revelation made him significantly reconsider his priorities. Learning that the woman of supernatural beauty he worked with daily was in reality a primordial demon of terrifying power, capable of annihilating an entire city to avenge a friend without even raising her voice, radically changed his attitude. The boldest merchant in the West, the one who had negotiated with kings and crime lords without flinching, decided that from that day forward, every word he spoke, every action he took, and especially anything that could even remotely be perceived as inappropriate would have to undergo extremely strict self-review beforehand. He solemnly vowed to keep himself in check with unwavering discipline. Barroom jokes have their limits, and that limit was named Testarossa. That being said, this anecdote raises a fascinating question about Rimuru's very nature. Cerberus. Unlike the organizations mentioned previously, Cerberus operates in the east rather than the west. Originally, the territories of the Eastern Empire were under the control of a clandestine organization known as Echidna, which held a firm grip over the eastern underworld. Yuki, with Damrada's assistance, destroyed it completely, and Cerberus was founded upon Echidna's ashes. At its head stand three supreme leaders known as the Great Lords, each bearing a title symbolizing one of humanity's fundamental desires: gold, women, and power. The organization's primary role is to handle illegal affairs that nobody else can officially accept or even dare to touch. In essence, Cerberus is to the east what the Free Guild is on the surface, except operating within the underworld itself. It is precisely because Cerberus accepts contracts of such dangerous and morally reprehensible nature that even nobles cannot publicly involve themselves with them, that the organization came to be viewed as a necessary evil by those moving within the spheres of power. The goods and services handled by Cerberus are particularly dark: weapons, assassinations, children from other worlds, elven slaves, an inventory as profitable as it is horrifying. It is also revealed that the slave trading organization known as Orthrus, which Yuki had the hero Masayuki destroy in order to grant him a heroic achievement, was actually an operation managed by Damrada himself. Furthermore, the civil war that tore apart the kingdom of Farmus and provided Diablo with so much amusement was likewise fueled behind the scenes by Damrada's manipulations. Cerberus's ultimate objective remains world domination. However, after coming into contact with Guy Crimson, Yuki partially redirected his ambitions and now seeks to sow chaos within the Empire itself, using Cerberus as a destabilizing force. Now then, let us take a look at each of the organization's three supreme leaders. The first is Damrada, known as Damrada of Gold, a merchant of extraordinary skill capable of building commercial ties with both humans and monsters alike, and who even went so far as to handle transactions involving summoned children on behalf of Demon Lord Leon. On the surface, he appeared to serve Yuki with absolute loyalty, but his true identity is something entirely different. He is Imperial Guardian number 02, the Vice Commander of the Empire's elite guard. Although Damrada is human, he attained an extraordinarily rare rank, that of a Saint Fist, a spiritual and martial ascension that places him above the overwhelming majority of humanity. He is also one of the closest allies of Rudra, Emperor of the Eastern Empire, and his strength is very real. He is capable of fighting on equal footing with the primordial Ultima and even Yuki Kagarazaka himself. In Volume 19 of the light novel, when he was temporarily summoned back through the power of the hero Masayuki, it was revealed that he referred to Granbell by the familiar nickname Gran, proof of a deep and ancient friendship. Originally, Damrada served Rudra alongside Granbell, and the two eventually parted ways through mutual agreement. Granbell would leave to unify the Western nations, fully intending to return to Rudra once his mission had been completed. But as mentioned previously, Granbell eventually descended into madness and came to view the Eastern Empire as an enemy threat. That shift changed everything. Two longtime friends became little more than allies in appearance, maintaining a facade of courtesy while secretly working against each other behind the scenes. The second supreme leader is Vega, known as Vega of Power, feared as the living embodiment of violence. Born as the child of a Magian, he grew up under unimaginably harsh conditions, forced from an early age to commit crimes daily simply in order to eat and survive. One day, the Free Guild issued an extermination order against him, and Yuki was dispatched to handle the situation. Yuki succeeded in defeating him, but recognizing the immense value of such overwhelming brute strength, he chose to take Vega under his protection rather than eliminate him. Vega later trained under Damrada through Yuki's guidance and eventually became an exceptionally dangerous warrior. But the darkness carved into his soul since childhood never disappeared. If anything, it only deepened further, transforming him into a malevolent creature who takes genuine pleasure in crushing and humiliating the weak. The third supreme leader is Misha, known as Misha of Women. She was originally in charge of the Echidna organization within the Empire and uses her captivating beauty alongside illusion magic and reality manipulation to seduce powerful individuals and reduce them to nothing more than puppets in her hands. Through these methods, she skillfully manipulated Calgurio, a division commander and influential figure within the Empire, subtly guiding him toward the invasion of Tempest. However, against Kondo, the #1 among the Imperial Guardians, neither seduction nor illusion magic had any effect whatsoever, and she was killed without the slightest difficulty. Mariabell Rosso. A descendant of Granbell and a reincarnated individual from another world, Mariabell Rosso is known as the Hope of the Rosso clan, and her talent more than justifies that title. Mariabell was born into the Rosso family, the rulers of the small kingdom of Siltroso. On the surface, she appears to be a 10-year-old girl with long blonde hair and striking pink eyes, features that eerily resemble those of the late Maria Rosso. Beautiful blonde hair framing a face filled with disarming innocence. But hidden behind that mask of childish sweetness lies a far darker and far more disturbing truth. Just like Rimuru and Yuki, Mariabell is a reincarnated person from another world. And what makes her even more unique is that she retained every single memory from her previous life from the very moment she was born, an incredibly rare trait even among reincarnated individuals, making her a truly exceptional existence. But who exactly was she in her previous life? In truth, Mariabell was once a mega-billionaire who ruled from the shadows over the entire economic and financial sphere of the West, back on Earth. A figure of absolute power operating in complete secrecy, manipulating global markets however she pleased, secretly dictating the fate of entire nations through the invisible yet merciless power of money. A master of finance whose true influence far surpassed that of any visible king, monarch, or head of state. And even after being reincarnated as the princess of a small kingdom in this new world, Mariabell never abandoned her overwhelming ambitions. True to herself down to her very core, her objective remains exactly the same: world domination through economic control, just as in her previous life. On the surface, this may seem somewhat similar to Rimuru's vision, creating a world where beings of every race can coexist in peace, yet their methods and intentions are complete opposites. Where Rimuru seeks harmony and coexistence, Mariabell seeks nothing but absolute submission. The Rosso family traces its lineage back to Granbell Rosso, a legendary former hero. By relying on that legacy and skillfully manipulating the Western Council from the shadows, the Rosso family claimed to bring stability and peace to humanity throughout the ages. And Mariabell, born into this prestigious bloodline, was welcomed as the family's ultimate hope, the one who could finally accomplish what entire generations had failed to achieve. At only 3 years old, she met Granbell himself in person, and at that exact moment, she was already manipulating everyone around her however she pleased thanks to her terrifying Sin Series' unique skill, greed. Faced with such a monstrous prodigy barely out of the cradle, Granbell could do nothing but stand in awe of what he was witnessing. He immediately became absolutely convinced that Mariabell was his chosen successor, the only person capable of unifying the Central World and finally turning that dream into reality. That is why he did not hesitate for even a second to proclaim her as humanity's hope, a title carrying both immense meaning and immeasurable expectations. Thus, armed with the memories of a past life steeped in power, extraordinary intelligence, and a unique skill of terrifying efficiency, Mariabell began operating in the shadows alongside the highest-ranking figures of the Rosso family in order to further solidify and expand their control over the Western nations. And one particularly remarkable detail stands out. She never attempted to place Granbell under her domination. Instead, she chose to walk beside him as a true ally. A strategic decision that says a great deal about both her political intelligence and her understanding of power itself. With the family's immense wealth and centuries-old influence, combined with the economic knowledge from her previous life and the abilities granted by her unique skill, a conspiracy of truly colossal scale quietly began taking shape within the deepest shadows, one capable of shaking the entirety of the Western nations down to their very foundations. Mariabell is a young girl blessed with intelligence far beyond ordinary comprehension, as well as a terrifying mastery of strategy and manipulation. But her personality is cold beyond measure, cruel in a way nothing can soften. She views other people solely through the ruthless lens of usefulness. Either they serve her purpose or they are meaningless. And if someone were ever to lose their value in her eyes, No matter their past relationship with her, no matter the loyalty they showed her the day before, she would discard them without the slightest hesitation or trace of remorse. A mindset so monstrous that it becomes easy to forget she is only a little girl, barely around 10 years old. That clinical coldness reached its peak during a particularly revealing exchange with Yuki. When he expressed a concern of extreme gravity, namely that her plans could lead to the destruction of all humanity, or even the world itself, Mariabell responded with shocking indifference, almost annoyed that someone would dare question her ambitions. So what? Those were the words she casually uttered, as if the possible annihilation of humanity were the most insignificant thing imaginable. Her reaction left Yuki, and even the 5 elders present at the scene, visibly stunned. Of course, Yuki's own reaction could potentially be interpreted as a calculated act on his part, but there is no denying that this was the very first time he allowed even the slightest trace of agitation to show, and for someone like Yuki, that alone says a lot. But why is Mariabell capable of such abyssal coldness? The answer lies deep within her psyche, forged and hardened by the countless traumas accumulated throughout her previous life. The endless power struggles, repeated betrayals, and constant backstabbing she endured in her former existence planted within her an irreversible and visceral distrust toward all human beings. You can't trust anyone, so I have to act alone. I'd rather die than become a tool used by someone else. Those deeply negative thoughts engraved into the very core of her being gradually transformed into a cold aggression and an obsession with control that goes far beyond simple ambition. This is no ordinary hunger for power. It is a psychological pathology born from wounds that nobody around her could even begin to comprehend. She almost resembles a human being from our modern era, crushed beneath depression and constant anxiety. Except that in Mariabell's case, at the center of every thought, at the beginning and end of every line of reasoning, there was always the same tyrannical obsession. If I let my guard down, someone will use me. A fixed idea, a permanent inner threat that never once left her mind. The spin-off Trinity in Tempest also gives us glimpses of this mindset through subtle yet highly revealing hints, confirming that this psychological pattern was deeply rooted within her very being. And it was precisely this overwhelming pride, combined with her visceral distrust of others, that would ultimately turn against her in the most fatal way imaginable. Because that obsession with control, along with her inability to trust anyone, eventually led Mariabell to commit an unforgivable mistake for someone of her stature, allowing her personal emotions to dictate her strategic decisions. She herself had already rationally concluded that if Rimuru ever chose to resort to violence as a demon lord, she would stand absolutely no chance of defeating him. And yet, driven by panic and impatience, she still chose to attempt to subjugate Rimuru through brute force, a blatant contradiction to her own assessment. She also catastrophically underestimated the threat posed by Veldora, naively believing that Luminous would be able to restrain him if he ever went berserk. A miscalculation of absolutely fatal proportions for someone operating at her level. Because no matter how powerful she had been in her previous life on Earth, she was now living in a completely different world. A world where terrifying monsters roam the lands, where gods and demon lords truly exist. Continuing to measure this reality through the standards and logic of the human world she once knew may have been Mariabell's greatest and most irreversible mistake. In the end, that was the true root of her downfall. Mariabell and Rimuru. These two beings actually share a common starting point. Both are reincarnated individuals originating from an Earth closely resembling modern-day Japan, and both sought to deeply influence this new world through the vast knowledge they carried over from their former lives. But that is where every similarity ends. Because their respective ideals, the futures they each sought to create, are so radically opposed that the contrast almost feels cruel. First, let's go back to Rimuru's ambitions in order to properly establish that contrast. Rimuru's goal has always been strikingly simple and unwavering: to create a place where everyone, regardless of race or species, can live happily and comfortably. To achieve this, he made multi-species coexistence the very foundation of his vision, transcending racial boundaries in order to build something entirely new. Rimuru's ideal is a nation where people eat well, enjoy a culturally rich life, and live with smiles on their faces. On the surface, this may seem naive, perhaps even too gentle or too pacifistic to realistically survive in such a brutal world. But that is precisely why this vision represents such a terrifying threat in the eyes of established powers like Mariabell. Because Rimuru's ambition is not limited to simple conquest. It involves fundamentally transforming the very values upon which the current order stands. Rimuru has no interest in forcing others into submission through violence. His method, far more effective and far more insidious, is to convince people that allying themselves with Tempest is in their own best interest, pushing them to cooperate willingly of their own accord. That philosophy of mutual benefit is Rimuru's most terrifying weapon of all, and it is precisely there that the deepest and most fundamental difference between his ideology and Mariabell's can be found. By the way, if you want a deeper understanding of this topic, make sure to check out the last 2 videos I uploaded. You definitely won't regret it. As for Mariabell, her ambition is completely different. As we mentioned earlier, hers is a dream of absolute and uncontested economic domination. To her, conquering the world does not require military force or territorial expansion. No, her vision was far more sophisticated and far colder than that. Her goal was to seize control over the issuance of currency, dominate the flow of goods, and regulate the desires of all humanity itself in order to construct a system where the Rosso family would hold the blade of global politics in their hands. To Mariabell, human beings were not people to guide or protect. They were resources, assets to be managed, exploited, and efficiently discarded whenever necessary. Deep down, she had likely realized instinctively that if the free and open economic zone Rimuru was building were ever to spread across the world, the invisible cage she had spent so long constructing would inevitably collapse on its own, piece by piece. The economy of the Western nations, controlled by the Rosso family for generations, was built upon a simple yet merciless principle: stability through stagnation. They manipulated the council, adjusted tariffs and market prices, and carefully ensured that no nation ever became too powerful, while also preventing the people from gaining too much knowledge or independence. Keeping humanity trapped in a perpetual state of controlled survival, neither truly prosperous nor truly dying, allowed them to maintain authority over entire populations while siphoning unimaginable profits in exchange for a peace that they themselves imposed upon the world. That was the form of peace the Rosso family had always defended. A stagnant world with no room for innovation, designed solely to preserve the privileges and achievements of a single bloodline. While the Rosso family schemed to keep the world under its control through stagnation and manipulation, Rimuru introduced something completely different: innovation through explosive growth. By combining dwarven technology, refined elven craftsmanship, and knowledge originating from modern Earth, he created conveniences and forms of entertainment the world had never seen before. But even more decisive were the countless infrastructures and inventions Rimuru established. He built roads, secured reliable trade routes, and continuously astonished the world with innovations capable of shaking the very foundations of reality itself, such as the Full Potion, a revolutionary product with completely unprecedented properties. In doing so, he shattered the old rules of the Western nations, rules that forced all trade to pass through the Rosso family, demolishing through his actions alone a financial and commercial system the family believed itself to be the eternal and unquestionable ruler of. And to Mariabell, this was not merely the rise of another business competitor, it was something far worse. It was absolute humiliation. To watch the very rules of a world over which she behaved like a goddess be completely rewritten by a mere slime. A symbolic blow so devastating that Mariabell could neither accept nor forgive it. Her greatest miscalculation was failing to understand what Rimuru truly was. In his own way, he too was driven by greed. But the scale of that greed was something Mariabell simply could not comprehend. Where she crushed the desires of others to replace them with her own, Rimuru did the exact opposite. He fulfilled the desires of others in order to build the world he envisioned. His desire to bring happiness not only to the people close to him, but to every being connected to him was so vast that it far surpassed Mariabell's fundamentally human greed. And no matter how immense the fortune she accumulated in her previous life may have been, in the end, it was still nothing more than a success measured by human standards. And the sheer scale of Rimuru's existence, this monster driven by primal instincts and limitless curiosity, simply surpassed anything Mariabell could have ever imagined, far beyond anything she was capable of comprehending. Economically incompatible, ideologically incompatible in the way they viewed other people, and incompatible in the future they sought to create. From the very beginning, Mariabell and Rimuru were destined to collide, and consumed by growing anxiety and frustration, Mariabell would eventually take an irreversible step toward her own destruction. Officially representing the Kingdom of Siltrasso, Mariabell personally traveled to Tempest, an inspection mission into enemy territory in order to witness with her own eyes the reality of this rapidly rising nation. And what she discovered during the founding festival genuinely left her stunned. Beautifully organized streets of breathtaking quality, technologies unlike anything she had ever seen before. But above all else, an overwhelming and contagious energy, monsters and humans living side by side with smiles on their faces, radiating vitality and happiness. On the surface, she appeared to be enjoying the festivities like any ordinary visitor, but internally she instantly grasped with cold clarity the terrifying significance of what she was witnessing. As a small but revealing side note, during a sushi order, Mariabell specifically requested that it be served without wasabi, and in the video game scenario version, she is even shown reacting with clear disgust towards sushi containing wasabi, casually remarking in her usual composed tone that even someone as greedy as herself still has things she simply does not want. A strangely humanizing detail in the portrayal of a character otherwise almost completely devoid of ordinary weaknesses. Tempest's abnormal economic power, its astonishing technological advancement, and above all, its ability to redefine the rules of commerce at terrifying speed. Mariabell had seen all of it with her own eyes, and the conclusion became painfully obvious to her. If those forces were ever allowed to spread throughout the Western nations, the economic control system the Rosso family had spent centuries constructing would collapse beyond recovery. This country will eventually take everything from us. Driven by that conviction and by an overwhelming sense of urgency, she immediately moved into action, seeking to weaken Tempest's momentum before it became too late. Her first move was a covert attack orchestrated through nobles secretly manipulated behind the scenes during the founding festival itself. Pulling the strings from the shadows, Mariabell pushed merchants and nobles into demanding that every massive transaction generated by the festivities be paid entirely in cash, exclusively using dwarven coins. Under normal commercial circumstances, credit systems, delayed payments, or trade agreements would naturally have been accepted. But by deliberately weaponizing the fundamental rules of large-scale commerce in order to enforce immediate cash payments, the objective was obvious. Push Tempest, whose liquid reserves were limited, into a severe liquidity crisis and tarnish its newly established reputation. A strike aimed not at military power, but directly at the most vulnerable heart of an economy itself. A cold, calculated, and incredibly precise move perfectly reflecting the financial expertise she retained from her previous life. And yet, this seemingly flawless plan was ultimately countered by the quick thinking of Rimuru and his allies. Rimuru requested the cooperation of the kings of various nations, and by exchanging the rare stellar gold coins, he successfully gathered enough dwarven coins to honor every transaction without failure. The outcome was brutal. The merchants who participated in this campaign of economic harassment were expelled from trade entirely, while the nobles secretly pulling the strings behind the scenes fell into complete disgrace. Mariabell's scheme collapsed without achieving even the slightest trace of victory. However, this crushing failure only deepened her hostility toward Rimuru, acting like a silently burning fuse destined to inevitably lead toward a far more violent direct confrontation in the chapters ahead. Now, let's talk about the unique skill Mariabell was born with. Greed, a Sin series skill of exceptionally rare nature and terrifying power. As she grew older, she gradually expanded the range of desires over which she could exert influence, massively increasing the versatility and applications of her abilities. The main functions of this skill can be divided into three distinct categories. The first, the ability to perceive the desires of others. She can see with surgical precision what every individual truly desires deep within their heart, what they seek to achieve, what excites them, what terrifies them. By reading those desires as if they were an open book, she can instantly identify exactly which emotional strings to pull in order to manipulate someone however she wishes. The second, crushing the desires of others and replacing them with her own. By amplifying certain desires already existing within a target, or even implanting entirely new desires from scratch, she can steer her victim's behavior with terrifying precision, pushing them toward actions that directly serve her own interests. And this ability was not limited to influencing other people. Mariabell could also turn it upon herself. by amplifying her survival instinct, that primal and overwhelming desire to stay alive, to its absolute limit. She could unlock dormant internal resources and dramatically strengthen herself in an instant, reaching levels of power her normal capabilities could never have achieved. The third function, forced domination through the brutal injection of desire. This technique is an extreme application of the second ability, but far more violent in nature, and it comes with a massive risk, the complete destruction of the target's ego. Where the second function manipulates subtly, this one crushes outright. But Mariabell managed to turn even that danger into a weapon. By flooding a target with such an overwhelming and sudden surge of desire that their very sense of self collapses under the pressure, she could create berserkers, fighters whose lifespan became limited, but who would battle without the slightest fear while unleashing the entirety of their latent potential. Terrifying and merciless single-use living weapons. One of the victims of this technique, Gaye, ultimately ended up being killed by Rimuru, a character who, ever since his introduction, never really managed to win over the audience, and whose disappearance will likely not be mourned by many. In terms of direct offensive power, the skill Greed also possesses a devastating attack known as Greed Flare. This technique physically materializes the burning desires of its user and unleashes them as destructive force. And the more intense and all-consuming the desire fueling it becomes, the more catastrophic the attack's power grows, capable of incinerating and reducing everything within range to ashes. But the absolute technique, the ultimate killing move of this skill, is Lost Entropy, a technique of unimaginable terror. It targets the most fundamental desire within a person, the instinctive will to live engraved deep within the soul itself, and completely reverses it, transforming it into an irresistible longing for death. An absolute death curse that renders every weapon, every suit of armor, and every form of defense completely meaningless. By its very nature, it is almost identical to Death Blessing, the ability of the demon lord Luminous, forcibly extracting from the target the very possibility of resisting their own death, compelling them to walk willingly toward annihilation itself. However, even a terrifying skill like Greed possesses one clear and irreversible weakness. It simply does not work against individuals whose desires surpass those of Mariabell herself. If the intensity of a target's desire exceeds her own, the domination becomes incomplete and unstable. And worse still, it creates a massive opening for the opponent to counterattack, a limitation that, under the right circumstances, can become absolutely fatal. The pawn Mariabell chose as the most valuable tool to fulfill her ambitions was another worlder, the Guild Grandmaster, Yuki Kagurazaka. Upon this young man overflowing with ambition, she fully unleashed her unique skill Greed, whose function in this case was to amplify and intensify the target's desires to uncontrollable levels. Because of this, Mariabell became convinced that she had obtained absolute and irreversible control over Yuki. To someone who had once ruled over the global economy in her previous life, an ambitious and greedy young man like him seemed nothing more than a convenient tool, easy to tame and manipulate at will. And for a time, Yuki's actions truly did match the perfect image of an obedient puppet faithfully carrying out Mariabell's will. In fact, during the Western Council session attended by Rimuru and his allies, Glenda, after being captured by Sue, personally confirmed to Rimuru that Yuki was completely under Mariabell's control. Even in the eyes of others, he was viewed without question as a puppet devoid of free will. From Mariabell's perspective, Yuki's organizational talents and vast knowledge were merely interchangeable components meant to perfect her system of economic domination. The very idea that the chain she had wrapped around his soul could someday be broken never even crossed her mind. And it was precisely that overwhelming arrogance, born from years of domination without resistance, that clouded her judgment and blinded her to the most important truth of all. The direct confrontation between Mariabell and Rimuru ultimately took place within the ruins of Amrita, buried beneath the underground depths of the puppet nation of Jistav. There, Mariabell unleashed every pawn and trump card at her disposal without holding anything back. Fighters stripped entirely of their free will thrown against Rimuru, an attempt to mentally dominate Rimuru himself through greed, the summoning of the Chaos Dragon, the deployment of a holy field, and the supposed cooperation of Yuki. In Mariabell's calculations, all of this should have been enough to finally subjugate Rimuru and seize control of Tempest itself. Reality, however, proved utterly merciless. Against Rimuru, Wielder of multiple ultimate skills, greed produced absolutely no effect whatsoever. Mariabell had not even managed to step onto the battlefield before the match had already ended. Her ultimate technique, the fatal attack she believed to be unstoppable, lost entropy, was effortlessly erased and overwhelmed by the crushing power of Rimuru's ultimate skills. What was meant to be her most devastating attack was likely, from Rimuru's perspective, nothing more than an insignificant breeze. And if Rimuru appeared hesitant to finish her off at certain moments, it was only because he wanted to capture her alive in order to extract information from her, not because he lacked the power to end the fight. And if Mariabell had truly succeeded in harming Veldora or Milim as she intended, pushing Rimuru into genuine rage, she would have been annihilated instantly without even being given the chance to say a single word. And honestly, death itself might have been the merciful outcome. Because as everyone knows, Rimuru is a demon lord who cannot tolerate seeing his allies harmed more than anything else. A sensitivity so overwhelming that even divine particles themselves would tremble before it. Making an enemy out of him is a mistake nobody should ever commit, and that was something Mariabell should have engraved into the deepest part of her soul long before taking action. But blinded by absolute confidence in her own power, incapable of accepting the merciless reality that her abilities had absolutely no effect on him, she committed the worst possible mistake for a strategist of her caliber. She catastrophically miscalculated and underestimated Rimuru's true strength despite every warning sign she herself had already identified. Every single one of her trump cards had been played for nothing. And beneath the crushing pressure of such a humiliating and unacceptable defeat, the entire structure of lies and illusions she had carefully built throughout both of her lives collapsed with deafening force. Mariabell descended deeper into the ruins, desperately searching for one final escape route. Her last resort, meticulously prepared in advance, was to trigger the self-destruction of the magical control reactor hidden within the depths of the site. One final desperate act. One final attempt to overturn the outcome of the battle through a gesture as insane as it was definitive. But when she finally reached the designated location, she found nothing but an entirely empty space. Nothing. The reactor was gone. Confusion overtook her. And within the heavy silence of that underground chamber, calm and confident footsteps echoed behind her. She turned around, and the person standing before her was none other than Yuki, the very individual she believed to be completely under the control of greed. Faced with her absolute shock, Yuki revealed the truth with the same carefree smile and detached attitude so characteristic of him. Because yes, Yuki should have been entirely under her control, incapable of acting on his own or plotting behind her back. Except Yuki possessed a unique skill of extraordinarily abnormal nature, Creator. A skill that allowed him to freely manipulate his spiritual energy and alter its form however he desired, limited only by the intensity of his will. And through that skill, he had created a special constitution, anti-skill, an ability granting him total immunity against any interference caused by skills or magic. In other words, Yuki had merely pretended to be under the influence of greed from the very beginning. Not for a single moment had he ever truly been manipulated. This world is my playground. My ambition is to become its absolute ruler. Yuki's true objective had been to let Mariabell take center stage, use her as a weapon to crash directly into Rimuru, and hope that both sides would destroy each other in the process. And at the perfect moment, seize the powerful, unique skill greed for himself. The entire scheme had been calculated with the cold precision of a master chess player. Then came a casually extended hand, so natural, so effortless. Mariabell had no time to react, not even a fraction of a second. Her small body was pierced through without mercy, and even as her consciousness faded into darkness, she still attempted to resist Yuki. One final desperate surge of will that ultimately changed nothing. Greed was completely and permanently torn away from her in the final moments of her life. Destroyed by people even greedier than she was. There could have been no ending more ironic, more humiliating, or more cruel for a woman who had built her entire existence upon greed itself. You were simply unlucky. With the body of a child, you would never have been able to fully master your abilities anyway. Those were the final words Yuki spoke to her, carrying his usual weary smile. And with those words, Mariabell Rosso closed her eyes for the very last time, bringing an end to a life as brief as it had been all-consuming. Mariabell had been the central pillar of the Rosso family's entire strategy for economic domination over the Western nations. Losing her represented an irreparable fracture, the consequences of which were simply immeasurable. In the aftermath of the incident, the case was officially classified as an accident. As the ruler of a nation, Rimuru was required to meet with Mariabell's parents, the king and queen of the kingdom of Siltrosso, but what he discovered left him speechless. Both of her parents remained completely emotionless, their faces utterly devoid of reaction, as though the death of their own daughter meant absolutely nothing to them, as if something inside them had been permanently extinguished long ago. The explanation, as Granbell himself hinted during episode 3 of season 4 of the anime, was chilling. Mariabell's parents had fallen under the influence of greed when she was only 3 years old. After remaining subjected to that domination for nearly 7 years, until she reached the age of 10, their emotions had gradually been eroded and consumed from the inside out. Rimuru could not help but wonder whether she might have walked a completely different path in life had she been given the chance to grow up normally and experience a childhood appropriate for her age. He immediately acknowledged that such thoughts belonged purely to the realm of impossible hypotheticals, but even entertaining that possibility, if only briefly, said a great deal about him. The true scale of the anomaly known as Mariabell could also be measured by this fact alone. She had destroyed even the most intimate unit of human society, her own family, and perhaps the person most devastated by her death was Granbell Rosso himself. The man who had kept her close to him, the one who had placed absolute faith in her, was now drowning in an abyss of grief and despair that nothing could ever fill. Granbell Rosso. On the surface, Granbell Rosso appears to be nothing more than the royal figurehead of a modest nation, Siltrosso. But in reality, he is the founder of the Council of the West and the one secretly coordinating the 5 elders from the shadows. He is also one of the Free Guild's greatest financial backers. Taking everything into account, Granbell Rosso stands as one of the true rulers of the West. He also possesses a second identity in the form of a spiritual body projected into the structures of Ruberios, where he is known as Gran, the Grand Cleric of the 7 Luminaries, the leading figure among the former luminaries tied to the Holy Empire. But originally, Granbell was far removed from these underground schemes. He was once the light-chosen hero, humanity's ultimate military force. During that glorious era, Granbell possessed the ultimate skill Serial, an angelic-type ultimate skill born from the evolution of his unique skill Unyielding. This ultimate skill, which governs life and the cycle of reincarnation, possesses attributes deeply comparable to the ultimate skill Asmodeus wielded by Demon Lord Luminous, both embodying, in their own way, absolute authority over life and death. To complement this overwhelming power, Granbell also wielded a divine-grade weapon worthy of an awakened hero, the sacred long blade Truth, a weapon belonging to the category of divine armaments, forged for humanity's greatest champions. Throughout these battles fought for humanity's survival, Granbell repeatedly clashed with Demon Lord Luminous, and their countless fierce duels eventually led to an unexpected reconciliation. That is why Granbell shares a special relationship with Luminous, one forged through the harshest trials imaginable, and why he ultimately came to support the system of governance established by Luminous, founded upon coexistence between humans and vampires. Granbell had therefore made the unconditional protection of humanity the very core of his existence. But it was precisely this ideal that shattered when he lost the person dearest to him, his wife, Maria Rosso, who was murdered by humans during his years as a hero. It was not some monstrous enemy that stole away the person he loved most. It was the very humanity to which he had devoted his entire life. This profound trauma irreversibly twisted his philosophy. Rather than protecting humanity, he now chose to dominate it instead, and his love for Maria never faded. On the contrary, it evolved into something truly obsessive. He preserved her corpse through the ages and eventually brought her back as a servant through the forbidden necromantic spell Raise Dead, Resurrection of the Dead, refusing to accept the irreversibility of death. It was in this context that Granbell encountered the prodigy Mariabell, the granddaughter he chose as the heir and successor to all of his ambitions. And there is one deeply unsettling truth that must be clarified here. Mariabell is actually the reincarnation of his own wife, Maria Rosso, making the relationship between them even more strange and ambiguous. After dying as Granbell's wife, Maria reincarnated on Earth, where she eventually rose to dominate the world of economics. Then, after the end of that second life, she reincarnated once again in the Central World under the identity of Mariabell, Granbell's own granddaughter. In other words, she is simultaneously his former wife and his own granddaughter, a situation as absurd as it is disturbing. And so, the former hero Granbell, having become one of the clerics of the Seven Luminaries under the identity of Gran of the Sun Luminary, while even serving as Hinata's master for a time, continued weaving his secret schemes in pursuit of his dream of absolute domination over the human world. He allied himself with Damrata, an influential merchant from the east, in order to orchestrate a clash between Rimuru and Hinata that was supposed to neutralize both of them at once, but the plan ultimately failed. His secret identity as Gran was later exposed, and his attempt to use Luminous for his own purposes backfired completely. In the end, it was Luminous herself who destroyed him. As for Gran, his spiritual body was annihilated by Nicholas, a member of Hinata's religious order. Later on, when the power of the hero Masayuki temporarily brought back the former Granbell in all the glory of his past prime, the overwhelming authority he radiated surpassed Hinata with astonishing ease, and he crushed his enemies without the slightest visible effort. In his own way, Granbell had been pursuing a form of world peace, even if the methods he chose were those of a tyrant. Perhaps that is why even Luminous herself could never truly hate him completely, and for readers, he remains one of those characters whose moral worth is extremely difficult to judge. Razul is a millennia-old friend whom Granbell encountered and personally named back when he was still a sane hero, before tragedy corrupted him. As a member of the Insectar race, Razul possesses a natural advantage against demons, making him, under normal circumstances, the Rosso clan's ultimate